where you get your learning opportunity matters. So you can have a great learning experience during your PhD or likewise at a company as well.
My point of view, and I'll put it out loud if you are going to promise me not to put that on the reel. So just to take a cue from what Sarthi was saying, right? I genuinely do believe that with your AI models becoming much more powerful, the traditional expectation of what an analyst does today is going to be under question, and it is going to definitely have an impact.
The scary thing to me that looks like is if you combine General Dynamics with OpenAI, General Dynamics with all the actuators and the motors and the robotic dog with a gun, with these models, that is dangerous.
Putting it down to order immediately.
As simple as that. You see one CV and उसने ये भी किया है. And then you see the second CV, उसने भी ये किया है. And everybody copies the CV, everybody copies the same projects. It doesn't have any information. It's all background noise. It cancels out. So if somebody has actually the intent to learn, and if it goes negative, because you're saying you're doing great chal.
The discussion that we've had has been, maybe, we didn't expect this kind of a discussion to happen, and I hope you enjoyed as well. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
For being such a great host.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully recording is done.
Record button दबाया था ना?
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining in. I know it was slightly tricky for everyone to join on a raining afternoon in Bangalore. I think today we have wonderful guests with us. We have Parth, Shivram and Mohit. I'm Ashwin and I have Ankur with me who will be helping me in moderating the discussion. We are hosting an episode on data science, analytics and AI today, as you all know. I will quickly start with my introduction, right? I'll then tell you the goal of the podcast, and then we can maybe take up your introductions. So, I was till very recently, I was working at Udaan in the product team. I was working in the lending arm of Udaan Capital, and before this, I graduated from IIT Ropar. Over to you, Ankur.
I graduated and started working as a data scientist in Deloitte. After that, I'm working in luxury auth startup as machine learning engineer. So it would be a fun conversation, I guess, on data science today. So
now on to the goal. So the goal of today's podcast is to help people make more informed decisions. Decisions that are informed by awareness, decisions that are informed by whatever you say today, right? Which is helping them build a stronger picture, it adds to their perspective, essentially. And we want to help people who want to enter data science, analytics or AI. Second, we want to help people who are already in this space to succeed as a data science leader, to become a data science leader and succeed in this space. And also, of course, we will talk about all these topics, GenAI, within data science, analytics, what are best practices. We will talk about trends, we'll talk about advancements, which will again, for some of the people who are not at all thinking about data science and analytics, maybe it will arouse some kind of interest in this space. That's the goal. Now I would request you all for a brief introduction, just like I and Ankur did, brief introduction about you. And in particular, I want you to touch upon one aspect, what motivated you to get into analytics or data science or AI. So whoever wants to start. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first. So I'm Parthasaradhi. I'm currently with WeRize as heading the data science team. Earlier I was with Udaan Capital and ANZ City. So all through largely BFSI and fintech space, all through into analytics, it happened by chance. So I was in ISI and from there it just naturally entered into analytics space and I've been into analytics and data sciences.
Awesome.
So you talked about ISI.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us your journey starting from ISI? So we want a little bit more detailed overview.
Okay, so step back, I was into the standard rat race at that time in 12th, trying to get into engineering, the typical IIT. I didn't clear the mains. I knew the day I wrote the exam. But then it just so happened that my dad was passionate about maths and he said, okay, give exams. and at that point in time I loved maths. I just happened to give the ISI exam. I had no idea what was ISI. I just happened to give it, but I sailed through. It had an interview round and all of that, so that was interesting. But finally, when I got in, that's when I realized it's one of the premier institutes in India. That was great. But 5 years, stats, maths, a lot of learning. But then, in the campus placement is how I got into a company called Symphony Services, and that was into analytics. So ISI naturally attracts analytics. So in term because of their curriculum and stats. So that's how I got into analytics, and since then I've been in analytics.
And post Symphony, you moved to
Citi.
Yeah.
Citi was based out of working for the US market in KPO setup initially. I also moved to the Indian market, Citibank India. Then that was on the marketing analytics side. So these were, I would say, largely on credit cards, retail banking products, right? And then I moved to ANZ. ANZ was again Australia, New Zealand, multiple geographies, Singapore, Vietnam, all retail lending products. This is core credit risk modeling. So this is where I ventured into the core risk part of the banking domain, I would say. And that was a lot of in-depth into different types of credit risk modeling. We used to call it decision models, capital models, and provision models.
Understood.
Application behavior collection scorecards, or how do you estimate unexpected losses, how do you estimate expected losses as per IFRS 9 compliance, and so on. So that was ANZ. And then I guess probably there was a lot of wave around fintechs in India. So
Still is.
I said I was in Bangalore and said, okay, I do want to go back to the Indian related companies working for the India market. So when Udaan Capital opportunity came up, I grabbed it, and I was very happy to join Udaan Capital. I loved my stint there. It was a very different world, but I really loved the 2 years I was there at Udaan Capital.
Understood. And that's how we met as well. Post which you moved to WeRize. Yeah.
I'm currently with WeRize. It's a fintech into lending, tier 2, tier 3.
Understood.
cities, mostly.
Based in Bangalore only.
Based in Bangalore. Yes.
So just for the audience, I guess you mentioned one thing, KPO setup. Like
Yes.
what is that?
So it's, you can think of it as knowledge process outsourcing is what it was called earlier. Nowadays we see it as GCC, Global Centers of Excellence, or COE. There are many terms to it, but basically when you're trying to solve problems for other markets sitting based out of India, that's what typically you call it as these KPOs, GCCs, and so on. But that's slightly different from if you're trying to solve a problem for an Indian market.
Understood. Got it. Why don't you go ahead next, Mohit?
Sure. So hi everyone, this is Mohit. Actually, formal title is Dr. Mohit Kumar. I do happen to be a PhD graduate. So taking a cue from what you asked, Parth, I'll start in reverse chronological order. So did my undergrad in computer science from IIT Kharagpur. Then went on to work with IBM India Research Lab for 2 years. Just teeing off from your question earlier, how I got there was I did my summer internship, and it was in speech recognition. So this is 2001 when AI, ML, this kind of wave had not happened. So we were doing speech recognition way back in 2001. IBM had a speech recognition system in the Indian market for Hindi in 2002, 2003. That's when I joined IBM formally. Actually, that is also an interesting story. I had my master's admit for CMU post-graduation, but 9/11 had happened, so didn't join. Joined IBM India Research Lab instead. So for 2 years was there, and we worked on Hindi speech recognition system. 2002 and 3 mid is when we had a commercial offering out, but it was way before its market timing. Right now you see speech recognition still being used a lot of places, but 2 decades ago it wasn't in vogue because the mobile revolution had also not happened at that point in time. So commercially it did not hit that scale or that success, but that was my first stint into AI, ML, NLP, starting with my summer internship to working on speech recognition tech, natural language technologies from IBM, at IBM. Then 2 years at IBM, I was a researcher at IBM full time. moved to CMU for grad school. So did my master's and PhD from CMU. That is also an interesting story. I was there full time at CMU only for about 3.5 years, doing my master's and PhD, while finished my PhD part time. So I had moved to Accenture Technology Labs full time
During PhD itself,
Yeah,
you started.
did my master's, started my PhD program, moved to Accenture Technology Labs full time, and finished my PhD remotely or part time. So I had my work experience there as well, and it was a awesome win-win situation for all parties because I got my PhD. Accenture had an offering that Accenture took to market based on some of the work that I had done for my PhD. So Accenture got a commercial offering. It's still running in the market. I had my PhD. So about 5.5, 6 years is how long I worked at Accenture Tech Labs, and then moved back to India post my PhD completion. Moved to Flipkart as the first data science hire.
This was which year?
This is 2013, December 2013.
Flipkart is new.
I was going to ask the same thing, Andy.
Yeah, so actually it wasn't new, but it was still startup. And there weren't that many. InMobi was the other big one, and Flipkart was the poster child of startups, and it was just coming onto the scene. So it was a very risky move for me, being from the research stream, research labs, PhD, master's, PhD, again research lab. The choice between, for me, I wanted to move back to India, but the choice, there were other research labs that had opened up since then versus Flipkart, which is a startup. So and that was an interesting journey, so to say. But yeah, so joined Flipkart as the first hire in the data science team, leadership team as well at Flipkart. Was with Flipkart for about 5.5 years, then moved to Udaan as head of data science, data platform, product analytics, and fraud and abuse. That's how we've met with Ashwin. So 4 years at Udaan, then moved to Jupiter, which is fintech, for a year, and since as of last month, for a month and a half, started my own vishwa.ai. So yeah,
Super interesting, super valuable. Natural question that comes here is, how did you make that transition from US to India, plus from a large company like Accenture to a startup which is just coming up, Flipkart? So that switch, so the thought process that went in you, that was there in your mind, that point, we want you to talk about it.
Sure. So two aspects. One is US to India. So at a personal level, I had always wanted to come back to India and settle in India. In US, whatever we wanted to do, we had almost already done because 5.5, 6 years, or actually I was there in US for a decade. Did studies, had a blast at doing my master's and PhD, did skydiving, rafting, all kind of crazy activities. Then had worked full time at a research lab, got a very rich perspective of US-India working. I think we spoke about KPO and how does that work. So I was on the US side of a big consulting company. So I could understand how things work. Where the decisions are being made, how decisions are being made, how the context gets passed from clients to the industry. But and if that is of interest, I can go deeper into my read of those situations. But coming to the US to India question. So from US, personally wanted to move back. Secondly, from an opportunities perspective, India had started booming, right? From research labs to startups, it had started happening. So when one thing was very clear to me when I'm moving back to India, I wanted to work at a place which was India focused, because that's what I had seen at Accenture, where the decisions are being made, where the customer is, where the market is, all of that context is essentially there. So the core decision making and that value is sort of there. So the choice was clear, wanted to move to India, work on an India focused problem or India focused teams. That is also possible in research groups. There are research groups which are sort of having core Indian focused research as well. But Flipkart was a very risky move at that point in time, and as I say, paths less taken. And I've taken quite a few paths which are paths less taken, like including defending my PhD part time. Probably an interesting story. My advisor had, during my graduation dinner, when I take them out, he shared with me that he had two bets with fellow faculty members whether I'll finish or not.
Why two bets though?
I don't know, two of them whether I'll finish or not. So it's very hard. There's a term in PhD called ABD, all but dissertation.
Okay.
You'll see tons of people as soon as they get into that ABD mode and they step out in the industry, they never finish. So there's tons and tons of, even my batchmates, quite a few are in that status. Wow. So as soon as you start working, it's like, the motivation to actually defend and get that is just keeps going down. And the timing wise, effort wise, it takes a lot of effort to just finish that. So that was that. So moved to India, joined Flipkart. The choice was research labs versus Flipkart. I had interviewed with quite a few other startups as well. Flipkart clicked. Actually, Amod is a schoolmate of mine.
Yeah.
So school and then college together as well. And we were not in touch. We just got in touch serendipitously because of some third person who wanted to come to Flipkart. So we started talking, and it took me about a year and a half. We started talking in May of 2012. I joined in December 13. So that's how long it took.
1.5 years.
1.5 years. Well, because of PhD, as well as they were setting up, as I said, were first hire. So Flipkart was just setting up the data science team. So that's how the journey happened.
I think this is a good demonstration of networking starts at school.
Yes, that definitely helps.
Shivram, why don't you go next?
So, as I kind of give you my introduction, right, there's a fair bit of mistakes that I've done in my life. Right now, as both of these two gentlemen were talking about, I was thinking about one big mistake. I should have gone first, because there's no way I'm going to be beating either of their stories after this. But, so first up, I usually go by Shiva. So throughout this conversation, feel free to call me that. And my foray into analytics, there have been multiple instances where I've just been very lucky. So my engineering, I'm basically from Coimbatore, which is a town in South India. And my engineering stream was production engineering. Has nothing to do with analytics. Zilch. So just like any other person out there, get into some engineering college. That was like the motive, right? I didn't know ISI. I don't think my parents ever even tried. But like probably second year, third year, I realized that manufacturing world and whatnot probably isn't going to be my fit. And whether it's college, whether it's school, I usually love puzzles. I'm fairly decently good at math. And I was kind of also doing a fair bit of quizzing on the side. So the ability to just kind of connect dots and kind of try and weave a certain picture together was always kind of there in my head. So around that time, luckily, was when, while the regular troves of your TCS and CTS and all the other organizations who were hiring at that particular point in time were coming into the campus, there was one particular company which kind of came in, which was Musigma. And probably, if you kind of talk analytics in India, probably Musigma is going to be one of those names that kind of strike out. So had a couple of my seniors from college who were kind of working over there. And when I realized that there was a company like this kind of coming in, I just called them up, and probably 30-45 minutes later, I was like, oh, this sounds different. It sounds interesting, right? In addition to all the other companies that came in, this was probably the only one where I put some focused effort, so to speak, right? As I said, lucky enough to be able to kind of crack through. And I still remember, I started working, and this was when analytics was very, very nascent, right? At some wedding or something, probably like a couple of months after I started working, somebody kind of asked, oh, where do you work? I was like, oh, I'm in Musigma. They're like, oh, you're a music director. That's fantastic, right? So that was Musigma, and that's how we kind of got into analytics. So the journey per se was one where the question always kind of come to, right? Like, do you do an MS? Do you do a PhD? Do you do an MBA? That question always kind of comes. And I chose not to do the MBA route. I don't have an MBA degree yet, but I chose to kind of instead work in startups, and that is where I kind of consider as my quote unquote soft MBA education, so to speak. So after Musicma, I worked my way in 2 startups, one on the consulting side, and another one which was an edtech firm in 2013 before edtech kind of became cool with not anymore, but this is between 2013 to 2016 where I was essentially heading analytics and data science for them. Startup isn't there anymore. We kind of had to shut shop. And about 2016, I moved back to consulting in Bangalore. So I was there for about 4 years. And towards the end, what I was doing was I was heading delivery for the entirety of their retail and CPG vertical, right? So this includes both your delivery and the sales, GTM, all of that stuff. And as much as the story kind of goes both ways, like startup, consulting, the reason why I kind of came back to consulting is where I realized that for you to be able to operate at some bit of scale, you got to be there in a successful startup or in a larger organization. And if that's not there, then you're probably going to keep hobbling it around. And so the consulting part is what gave me a sense of how to work with scale. But somewhere deep inside, the heart was always on either on product in India, because like as Mohit was mentioning, that's where the core decision happens. Like there, you're in the thick of things, you got a skin in the game, and that's where you kind of get a certain sense of satisfaction as well. So that is where I moved to what my current organization is, which is PhonePe. Been there for close to about 5 years now, and I essentially head analytics and BI for a whole bunch of the pods within PhonePe. So that's the professional side of things. And I kind of always do mention that it's important to also realize that while there is this aspect, and most of the points that you guys cover would be on that, for me, it's as much about having a certain passion in terms of work, trying out new things and all of that stuff, and that kind of getting, let's say, reflected back in your real life as well. So my innate sense of curiosity kind of keeps coming back, where either I try something new, like I've always been a fan of music. So like a couple of years back, peak COVID, I'm like, dude, what are you doing in your life? Pick up a guitar, right? So something or the other just kind of keeps popping up, and yeah, that's quick story about myself.
Wow, and I think I specifically really liked that, coming
From
to
production
analytics
engineering.
from production engineering.
Yeah.
We are
by
from
chance.
mechanical engineering.
Oh, you guys are. Also, am I the only non-Udaan alumni over here?
No, I'm also.
You're also non. Okay, I have company.
Right, so I think at this point I want to understand how your current organization, how your day-to-day responsibilities look like.
Mm-hmm.
So the intent here is to create a pie chart for each one of you. 30% this, 20% that. I know sometimes cannot be generalized much,
Yep.
but then just to understand the structure of your day-to-day responsibilities at your current startup or organization.
Sure, I can go first, right?
Yeah.
So I think what I believe, or my point of view, is that as and when you start kind of getting entrenched more, or you reach a certain degree of experience as you start growing within an organization, as much as you're looked at as an analytics leader, that is one core part, but there's a whole bunch of other things that you did not necessarily see as part of analytics, which start kind of creeping in. Because if I were to think about where my time goes, forget about a day, but if I were to take like a week type, because there's a little bit more standardness to it.
Correct, yes.
Probably just about 40-50% of my time goes on core analytics. And when I say core analytics, it's working with the different analysts within the team, figuring out either from a statistical technical standpoint in terms of, hey, this particular problem statement, this is what we're kind of trying to do. Does this work? Is this the right variable? And this particular seasonality that I know usually happens, how is it that you're baking it into your feature engineering? That core aspect of analytics or data science, or the other side, which is, hey, I just need to know that this particular decision needs to happen, is the story fitting state, which is where you're kind of looking at data, trying to make the story. That's probably about 40-50%. And in certain pods where it is still 0 to 1, if push comes to shove, I just jump in and I still work hands-on, because that's probably the world that I came from, and that's a certain sense of comfort. Like it's a typical dal chawal potato types, right? As much as you want pizza once in a while, you do want that. So that probably is about 40 to 50% of my time, and the rest actually kind of works more where you're not necessarily playing the analytics hat, but taking that view and actually working with your product manager as if you're a product manager, working with your business/sales counterpart as if you're a sales counterpart. And that's where the notion of, let's say, strategic thinking, strategic thoughts, all of those kind of things pop in. It's just merely about what is the observation that you have, whether it is from a data point, whether it is from something that you've kind of seen in the data, towards how is it that you're able to apply it in your day-to-day aspect, right? So that's the part where that 40% or whatnot is where I kind of call it as, I don't work as the analytics leader for, let's say, if I were to take an example in the merchant function, but that's the part where I'm part of the merchant function who happens to be good with data and analytics, right? So that's where the predominant stuff goes, and the remaining 10-20% is just going to be on people management, the other BAU stuff.
So 40% working with analysts and maybe getting into the pods wherever it's a 0 to 1 journey. 40%, 10-20% people management.
Sure.
And the remaining 40% is you talked about.
Good.
No, I think here you talked about so this point I just want to double click on. Can you explain this further? So maybe give an example of this 40%.
So the view is, let's say for example, if I were to take let me just take the example of one of the areas that I look at, which is a new app called PIN code, right? So that's, let's say, PhonePe's foray into the commerce side of things, right? So therein, if I were to take the analytics view, like, okay, this is your reporting, this is your dashboard, this is your analysis, and so on. But that other 40% that I was kind of referring to is where, if I'm talking about setting up the GTM, the sales GTM, it's not my responsibility to try and figure out, hey, this is how the reporting of each of the areas are doing in terms of either their input metrics or their output metrics, that the respective analysts or the respective folks in the business are able to kind of see it themselves. But the overview to be able to sit next to your sales head and try and figure out, hey, if something is not going well, why is it that it's not going well? Is it something to do with your process? Which means that I got to know, if not at the same level, at least a 70% view or an 80% view in terms of how day-to-day GTM works, as much as my sales counterpart. Right?
So all these hints you find in the data itself.
It starts from the data. It's kind of, to me, there's no start, and it's like a so there's something called the Ouroboros, right? Which is where essentially it's a Greek mythology, if I remember correctly, where there's a circle kind of biting its own tail. So for me, it's very cyclical in nature. If I just focus only on the data, then I'm just going to look at only what the data is saying, and data is just data, it's just numbers. Without a certain sense of what is happening on the ground, you're not going to be able to connect these two together. So you kind of keep straddling between both worlds, where you say, hey, this is a certain observation that I found when an agent went and did something. Now am I able to see it in data? Or alternatively, hey, I saw something in the data. Why is it that not reflecting back either in my metrics or in terms of how the behavior is happening? So that's where the intersection of both of these worlds end up happening, Ankur.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because this question actually pops up that we build a hypothesis, do we verify it with data, and we see a hypothesis in the data, is it happening or not? So that usually I used to ask people, okay, what do you do when you talk about data analytics? Now I got the answer, it's Ouroboros that you spoke about. It's head and tail.
Yeah, no, I think super interesting. I have one pie chart already. On to the next one, Parth. Why don't you go ahead? And I'm waiting for Mohit's answer. I think he has something. He's writing down.
I'm like, yeah, what am I doing?
We have the decision tree already.
See, I think it changes with the stage of the organization, the stage of your role, and so on. I would say currently, the way it is split, you can think of it as 20-20, 30-30.
Understood.
Right? So 20% of the time I'm trying to build the infrastructure for future, which enables better analytics, better decision making across the organization. 20% of the time I would say is modeling, core AI ML, which will again enable decision making. This percentage changes based on what happens. 30% what I call as functional analytics, which basically helps you make the actual decisions now, today, real, in the near term, very short term. How do you make those decisions? Trying to problem solve basically, right? And a large percent, the 30% actually goes into meetings, trying to understand the problem statements, connecting with all the people across the organizations. Like I said, for you to make sense of data, you need to understand the process, the problem statement, how the organization runs, because that tells you that helps you create hypothesis much better, right? So understanding of domain knowledge is extremely critical, and even identifying problems. You sometimes identify a problem when you are in a meeting, when you hear somebody else struggling, you can say, okay, we can help you with that, or we can solve that problem. Or by innate nature of analytics, I think everybody looks at numbers and tries to make sense, right? So practically every problem you can actually look at it. If you want to make a data-driven culture, you can practically get into any problem in the organization using data and try and use data to aid the decision. Sometimes, of course, you don't have enough data, then it's a judgment. But then, when you have sufficient data, you always can help in any part of the organization, is my view. So a large portion, I would say, goes into meetings, connecting with people, identifying, and rest of it working with the people to solve the problems.
Understood. Which I think that this last part is super important, because if you're not able to understand it very well.
Yeah, so I keep telling my team and probably everyone who talks about data science, domain knowledge is the most critical. Modeling is one part. Technique or coding is also another part, but the most important is understanding what you're trying to solve. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the domain? How do you link them? Without that, everything else is just a tool.
Yeah. So thanks for this. I think it's very insightful. Yeah, Mohit, why don't you go next?
So I'm confused. So at what life stage should I talk about, and where is the answer logically making sense?
3 pie charts.
Please start. I'm waiting for all three. Yeah.
So, it's a startup. We've just started. I joined about a month and a half.
Yeah.
To put a pie chart is just
Tough.
Yeah.
it's not happening.
It shouldn't be as well, right?
It is understanding. Of course, we
Right. So, for example, the lion's share of time right now is going into understanding the customer pain points, customer needs, right? What are the things that we should build for? So, Vishwa is like a generic GenAI enablement platform for SMBs, right? So, what we are trying to figure out is what are the pain points for SMBs, different segments, D2C. So we've spoken with a bunch of D2C brands, affiliates who serve D2C brands. Then there is another line on data entry agent. So different sectors where we are engaging, be it restaurants, be it any other place. So building that, as you said, domain context, problem understanding, customer pain point. That's sort of the largest share. And even if you are not in a customer call, just your mind is on that, figuring out how does that translate to. And the challenge essentially in a startup at this stage is you should not be building for a customer, right? You need to sort of abstract out those things that a customer is articulating as a pain point to make sure that you build a generalizable product that is applicable for tens and thousands of companies in that area. So that's the trick, that's the challenge, what you hear, what is their articulation, and then just understanding, like us training ourselves that when we talk to somebody, having that meta-analysis of, okay, they are a very early D2C brand, or they are 8 to 10 months into the business D2C brand, their needs will be different. Let's say somebody who's multiple years will have very different needs. So even just that mapping of that customer space of what they're talking about, that's a thing that most of the time is essentially going to in that sense, to the extent that even enterprise sales agreement. So that's what last week we've been sort of figuring out a couple of things around the enterprise sales agreement. So it's a very unstructured, so to say, job profile at this stage. So customer is one, then the R&D in terms of the product learning. Related to that is training, self-training as well. Do I know everything that's happening in the area? Absolutely not. This space is so fast expanding. So just training yourself up, understanding these bits, connecting the dots together in terms of, okay, here is the tech movement that's happening. What should our platform look like? How do we solve this? What's the scale, cost, performance? All of that aspect sort of comes in the R&D, product and training aspect. Then you have internal functions like hiring, takes time. Funding is something that we are spending some time right now. Even organizational stuff like legal, user agreements, this, that. So that's the life stage you are in, right? So all of that, that's what I was looking at. Okay, last month kiya kya? So yeah, that's the list of how unstructured the startup journey is. I don't know if there's a script to it or a path to it, but well, we are figuring it out ourselves for ourselves.
That's how startups are supposed to be.
Right. So yeah, you hope that this Brownian random motion leads you somewhere.
We'll streamline.
Understood. I think, wow, I think we have a lot of insights about whatever you are doing today. I want to understand, I think, since we are already very much deep into data science and analytics, I want to understand one problem statement per guest. Essentially, we want to understand any problem statement. You can talk about an interesting one, one of the problem statements that delivered significant business value, or a tough problem statement which you worked upon, and maybe one problem statement where you really learned a lot from that, right? So you can talk about any one problem statement I want, which will really open the minds of the audience in the sense that they will learn that, okay, this is where this person solved a complex problem statement or delivered a lot of business value using data science, analytics, or AI. And maybe we can take time to think through this. I've seen, for example, Mohit's one of his keynote speeches, and one of the problem statements he talked about was solving for Kirana stores using data science. I think, but that is a very generic one. Within that, more specific one we can talk about.
Yeah, I can talk about the Udaan examples because Vishwa, the impact is TBD, right? So I think Vishwa impact is TBD. Udaan, probably that's because it's relatable as well, and that has seen it has matured over time as well. So it's a very long journey that it went through. So the problem statement was last mile routing at Udaan. Now, the genesis of it is we tried to solve this at Flipkart as well, and we failed, right? So we did a bunch of modeling, the models were showing impact. When we tried to take it to production, it failed. So my learning more than the modeling are quite a bit on the softer sides as well. So it's a very rounded learning. That's why I want to share typically this kind of problem statement.
Sorry to interrupt, just a second. So before even arriving at solution, can we talk about the problem itself, last mile routing?
So what is last mile routing? So in e-commerce, when you own your own supply chain, like e-cart for Flipkart, Udaan had Udaan delivery as well. You have a bunch of deliveries that reach the delivery hub, and then it has to be sent out. So the last mile exact delivery. Now, a decent hub may have anywhere between 30 to 40 trucks going out. Like Udaan being B2B, it's sort of boleros and those kind of vehicles that are going out. Now, the last mile routing essentially is what item should which truck take, right? As well as the order in which it should deliver. So if you think of your computer science basic learnings that you would have done, is what you call traveling salesman problem. You want to minimize the distance that you travel, and you have to hit all your sales points, right? In real life, it becomes quite a bit more complicated with real life constraints that happen, and that's where the solution essentially was challenging along several dimensions, right? So the problem statement is relatively clear. You have set of deliveries, and delivery points. You have to figure out how many vehicles do you need, and for each vehicle you have to assign the delivery points. Now the challenges, I'll just come to probably the tech challenges and then the softer challenges. Probably that's the key takeaway, so to say, and maybe start with the business impact. The business impact of the overall solution, once it was developed and deployed over a fairly long period of time. It wasn't that it was deployed in 1 month. It took several iterations, including UI UX improvements on the tool itself. So it was a very long development and deployment journey, but overall impact was fairly significant at Udaan scale in terms of the net reduction of the distance traveled and thus the number of vehicles that were needed to actually do the delivery. Right. So both the time reduction in terms of two levels of impact. One, time reduction, what it used to take to assign, because that much more time you get in your hub operations. So if a human was taking 3 hours, you're able to do it in 30 minutes. That enables a lot of these operational processes, because imagine the operational workings as by 1 o'clock you need this cutoff, by 4 a.m. you need this cutoff, by 6 a.m. these vehicles need to start moving. So it's a very crunched timeline. By saving those 2 hours at night, you can have your order cut off, which was 10 p.m. the previous night, move to 11 p.m. the previous night. And that's the added advantage. So there's a lot of advantage in just saving the time, not just the productivity, but the business impact. So the business impact was twofold. One, on the side of saving the time to route, and then second was actually the number of vehicles as well as the distance traveled. That translates to the final metric is cost per delivery.
Yeah.
Right. Now the challenges and impact, challenges, so to say. The first challenge was when you are sort of technical challenges, several technical challenges. One thing that you can very well relate to is if you're crossing Sony Signal or Silk Board, you don't want to do it more than once, right? So that was one of the biggest challenges, that there are these bottlenecks that were there. In Delhi, you don't want to cross ORR in a ring road, outer ring road. In Mumbai, there are again these hotspots. So how do you incorporate these on-ground constraints, quote unquote tribal knowledge, as constraints in the algo to make sure that the algorithm works? So one. Second is, if you think of the classic traveling salesman, and if you had your hub in Whitefield and you had deliveries at in Bellandur, HSR, Sarjapur Road in the middle, and then Kormangla, let's say 2, 3, 4 deliveries in these middle areas, but majority of the deliveries in Kormangla. A classic algorithm would just assign it, okay, just do 1 delivery in Sarjapur Road, 1 in HSR, and then go to Kormangla and deliver that. The real life, it doesn't work that way, because the drivers they become more comfortable with their regions. That I'm going to take this to Kormangla, I'm not an HSR guy, or I'm not a Sarjapur guy. Driver bias. And there was a practical reason as well. A lot of these on-ground constraints are the shopkeeper says, I'm not available. Udaan is B2B e-commerce, so you're delivering to retailers. And the shopkeeper says, I'm not available. Come back again. Come back in 30 minutes. Any of those flux things that you can never incorporate in your algorithm, those operational challenges, the driver is able to manipulate or take care of if his delivery radius is limited. So if you're not making him, if the Sarjapur Road guy says this, he's done for, right? He cannot just come back and do that. So this is what you call along the route deliveries, which were not there. So now all of this constraint had to be put in the algorithm to make sure that we don't do this kind of deliveries. So there were a bunch of technical challenges that real life translating to technical challenges that need to be incorporated in the algorithm. The second class of challenges was the actual deployment of any machine learning operational system. Now this abstracts out from the exact problem this I've seen manifesting in pretty much everywhere when you are trying to deploy something which has an operational overhead, which is the softer aspect of the people who are actually using the tool feel threatened by it, that it's going to take my job. Right? Yeah. So when you're trying to deploy the system and the hub in charge who's doing the routing for 3 hours, and he's able to do it in 30 minutes. Like, he feels threatened that I will lose my job somehow. And that's when the acceptability of the solution, 99% it's working, 1% it's not working, that 1% keeps getting highlighted. So there's a very softer aspect of change management. Now, how do you deal with it in terms of systematically figuring out? So at least I had seen that in previous avatar at Flipkart. So at Udaan, from day one, this was the sort of kind of strategic management level discussion that we had, that this is going to happen. Now we need to structure the team such that we are able to figure out and separate out these. The catch is, it's not that there is no real feedback coming from the person who's using it. So in product management parlance, you have your real features that you need or gaps that you have in your product, and then there's this change management friction side. Now, if 10 things are being called out, 3 of them might be legitimate feature requests, product gaps, versus 7 are just noise, change management, friction that is sort of there. Separating that out is a very tricky bit. And you need special sort of teams, people who are very much domain experts, who are able to take that on-ground feedback and translate it into, which is typically how in a large company central operations teams are there. So having those teams involved at the core of these projects, where they are able to take on-ground feedback and then figure out whether this is just change management, they are not using this feature properly, or there is a gap, like along the route came to us as feedback from ground. Sir, ye nahi hoga. This is not going to happen, right? So you have to change your algo to make sure that you don't do this kind of deliveries. So that's the second larger bucket of challenges in terms of the software aspect. And whenever you're doing a project, making sure that you realize the what if, even if you are successful technically, what will it take to deploy, who are the people, how the team should be structured such that you get the feedback, but you are also able to do the change management and thus the deployment. This I have seen consistently across multiple projects. Whenever there is an operational project, that the team aspect or the software aspect, that leads to many more failures. So failures, if I were to summarize, that I've seen in life in general for any data science deployment, people aspect, then system integration aspects. A lot of things fail. You do something in isolation when you're trying to go to prod. Just a simple API changes. It was supposed to send ABC. It is sending A, B, C, D, E, F. You never accounted for it. So those integration failures, that's the biggest bucket that I have seen, the integration failures. And then obviously data challenges are sort of common and obvious.
These integration failures might lead to technical debt also in large organizations over the time when it keeps accumulating more.
It's very hard to figure out.
Yeah.
Because in C2 or during your data science pipelines and understanding, you're like, your model works perfect. It's awesome. It's showing this much impact. You're going to get 20% improvement. You deploy it, you don't see it. Or if you're sophisticated enough to measure, then you don't see it. If not, then it's like, deploy ho gaya. Yeah. But no benefit is being obtained. So I think those are very, very hard things. There's no formula to it, but very, very hard things to catch, but something that's the single biggest common of reason for failure of these projects. Yeah.
And it's, I guess, very hardcore data science problem. It's not easy to solve. Like if you expect some fresher, so they'll say, okay, we train a model and throw it in the bin and it will do the task.
So that's a challenge. It's not, again, in typical companies, you will have your data scientist and then you'll have some engineer who's working on deploying this.
To operationalize.
And that's where things start falling through the cracks. Because 2 people are responsible for 2 different aspects of things, and if both of them don't understand the context very well, then things break.
Throwing over the wall doesn't.
So even we've sort of set up the team where it's not just the deployment of this model, even the system integration also sort of breaks. Even when data scientists are responsible for deploying a production API and whatnot, still the integration fails.
But quick question here: who will take responsibility of the business impact? Did this really lead to solving that business problem? The data scientist or maybe a product manager there or someone else. The data scientist should ideally take that business responsibility
Correct.
also, that this is solved actually.
Right. So the accountability cannot be just one person. It has to be this entire team that is accountable for it. The responsibility has to be one of the leads.
Yeah.
Either it could be a data science lead or the PM, depending on how the organization is structured. You may not have PMs, like Udaan did not have PMs. So the product engineers would take that responsibility. But yeah, the entire team has to be responsible. कि मैंने अपना काम कर दिया doesn't cut it. So all parties have to understand the context in which things are there and make sure that the impact is delivered. Yeah.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah. Maybe, Shivram, Parth, whoever wants to go next.
Want to go, Parth?
You said you wanted to start first.
Sure, I know. Well, before we kind of get to that, there's one interesting point that you kind of mentioned, which was, when the APIs are getting integrated, like, oh, this is a small change, right? And I remember reading this article probably like a couple of years back. It was a long article. When I say long, it probably takes about 20-25 minutes for you to read through it. The title is "There is no such thing as a small change." And I sent that to every single analyst who was there in my team at that point in time, which then got circulated around, and it eventually ended its way up to the engineering team, where like it almost kind of became like, hey, it's a small thing. I'm like, no.
Very relatable.
Yeah, it is, right. So I think probably as I was trying to reflect and figure out, is there one? I was just trying to figure out X different things that happened, at least in PhonePe. Prior to that, a whole bunch of things that are supposed to be really, really good, but actually burnt up in flames. Is that a better example of sharing is what I was kind of thinking. But eventually let me just probably pick up a problem statement that's much more closer to my heart. And this is within the context of PhonePe, and specifically when I was looking at the merchant vertical, right? So just for context, right? PhonePe is a two-sided network, right? So all five of us, I'm hoping, use PhonePe. That's my plug. So you either use the PhonePe consumer app to do your regular transactions, or on the flip side, you're a merchant where you're using X different QR and yada yada to be able to kind of receive payments. So it's a two-sided network. So this is very specifically for the merchant BU, and within the merchant BU specifically on the offline side, because you could be an offline merchant or you could be an online merchant. Like Flipkart is an online merchant who will still be able to kind of use the PhonePe solution to be able to get payments from their customers. So this is probably very interesting because it almost kind of plays out like a saga, and all started in 2020 when our competitor introduced a tiny little speaker which acts as a transaction validation device, right?
Right.
And as much as we were kind of looking at our responses, we were trying to figure out, hey, is this of use to a certain merchant, and should we react to it and whatnot? It just kind of became an entire movement by itself, and it was kind of, they started scaling up during COVID as well, in which case we were trying to plug a whole bunch of other holes during that particular point in time. So this reason why I kind of call it a saga is because the entire, for lack of a better project, or the entire initiative starts with being able to kind of show that actual story to your organization, to your CEO, to your CTO, saying that, listen, this exactly is how we are getting beat by competition because of this one singular device, right? And as much as you kind of get a sense that, oh, you know what, I'm seeing more and more of a particular thing playing out in the market. That's something that people always realize. But the ability to be able to kind of quantify it and quantify it with confidence is where it was kind of a fair bit of challenge, and for which we essentially had to rely on very innovative ways to be able to kind of assign, saying that, hey, this is the attributable impact to my transaction loss that is happening because of the fact that a certain merchant switched from us to our competition, right? So that was the more easier part, right? Where they kind of knew that it was a problem, or we all knew it was a problem, but by kind of tagging a certain number to it is when you kind of realize. And this is something that especially a lot of I'm saying young, I don't want to sound like the dinosaur in the room, but usually the kind of the way it kind of goes is, hey, you know what, we have dropped 4% market share, we've dropped 10% in terms of transactions. We always kind of talk about these percentages losses and percentages growth as well when we're trying to make a certain point. But I always say that is important. But if, let's say, I want to make a point to Vishwa, and instead of me saying that, hey Vishwa, we are losing 10% of our daily transactions, if I look at him and I say, hey Vishwa, we're losing X thousand crores, X 100 crores per day, it's going to make a very, very large difference, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, the first part was to be able to kind of convince, saying that, hey, you know what, this is a certain thing, the need exists, and we need to kind of be able to kind of get into it. And that's where the story starts for us. Probably, if I get my timelines right, 2022 June, July is when we kind of came out with our version of the same product. And the reason why I want to kind of pick it out is it has a certain impact across different streams of how the business runs, has certain impact in terms of us not necessarily having to rely only on traditional analytics, but having to kind of use on more advanced statistical concepts to be able to kind of get to the same view. So if I were to like try and encapsulate the whole thing, and this is usually a question that I love to ask, and I might be kind of giving out the plot over here, but this is a problem statement that I love to talk to folks who I'm interviewing to be able to kind of get a certain picture, right? So the question that we started off with, at that point in time, today we have north of 39 million merchants, offline merchants, who are there on the PhonePe network. If I remember correctly, that time it was about 35. So the question was, I have 35 million merchants, and whatever investments that PhonePe did, we're able to kind of get a finite amount of devices. Let's say there was a couple of million devices. It starts with, who do I need to kind of go and give this to? It's a very simple thing, but the minute you start peeling the onion or peeling the cabbage at the risk of not crying, is where you kind of realize, okay, do I want to take the perspective of Vishwa, who is been with me as a consistent PhonePe merchant, who's been doing the amount of transactions? Or do I go with Sarathi, who is a merchant who's been doing with me, but I know for a fact that that particular person has also been transacting with Paytm? Who do I go? Do I ring fence my existing good merchants, or do I try and win the market? Is probably a problem statement that took a good amount of time for us to be able to not just get it from a data standpoint, but getting that broader element, which is where the strategic point kind of comes from. What is it that I want? Do I want to win market share right now? Or do I want to establish my credibility that, hey, you know what, I might be a year late into the game, but here is a product that works. Here is the proof of the pudding that it works, right? So we had to kind of go through the entire exercise in terms of who are the merchants that I'm going to getting to, what is the right price point that I need to go for, right? You're a second entrant in the market, right? Which means that you obviously need to kind of price it competitively. But if, let's say, you're going to be just keeping it very, very low, chances are that you're not going to necessarily get that skin in the game from a merchant. They're like, sure, you know what, I just paid whatever, some token 25 rupees for this. I'm not even going to use it. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to have a second fleeting thought about just keeping it on the side. But it's that right zone of tension where the merchant feels that, you know what, I've paid money for this, but not large enough where I'm questioning the need for it, where even if there is a small issue or if there is an issue, I'm going to flag it. I'm going to make sure that I pay in either my respective merchant support or potentially the agent who's kind of usually in and around that particular area to be able to kind of like, boss, this is not working. I did 10 transactions, it was calling out only 8, it was calling out only 9. So being able to kind of get that was the initial part of that saga. And within just a couple of years, we were able to kind of roll out a million or a couple of million of these devices onto the market. And we were like, oh, you know what? Fantastic. It's working. We're kind of then picking back with competition and whatnot. And that's when we kind of realized that as and when you start hitting scale, is when all the problems or all the assumptions, great assumptions that you took at the beginning where you all very gung-ho and whatnot, starts breaking, right? And one of the biggest things, and any fintech company, actually lending as well, all you guys know, that the minute I start dispersing loans, that is one relatively easier part. The challenge now comes back to collecting the damn money, right? And herein there is no notion of it's not gonna affect your CIBIL score, right? So what essentially happens is your device inactivity starts going up, and that's very, very natural, right? You're always going to have a certain percentage of loans in your typical banking environment where those loans are going to be defaulted, and the bank always takes those into account. And as long as you're kind of working in your upper and lower control limit, everybody's happy. And as and when we kind of realize that our devices starts kind of going more inactive, is when from a data standpoint, right, it's my responsibility, or it's our function's responsibility to be able to not just say that, hey, you know what, your device inactivity is X percentage. Everybody knows that, right? So being able to kind of come back and forget about just being prescriptive. I think it's always a journey, and that's where what Sardi was mentioning a little earlier on. Without that domain understanding, right, you're not going to be able to go down the journey. Without that knowledge, your journey stops at building a dashboard and saying that here is what it is. Now you do whatever you want to do with it, right? That's a very passive way of kind of running analytics. So what essentially ended up happening was we had to kind of break it down into multiple parameters. One, and if I were to kind of take the most simplest way, let me put the full assumption that the merchant is coming from the right place. If that is the case, a merchant who is not using it is probably not using it for two reasons. A, the price is too high for them, in which case it's a wrong sell. B, the device is not working the way it's supposed to be working. And the notion of what a device is working, not supposed to be working, is not trivial, because it could be, I'm supposed to call out 10 transactions, it called out only 9. Was the battery, I was kind of told that it will last for 8 hours or 9 hours. It is lasting only for 7 hours, right? The fact that, this particular call out happened 4 seconds after the transaction was done. There were X different things that popped out. So what we had to do, and because these devices, they're not using the best of IoT technology for you to keep emanating, let's say, telemetry data the way it's coming out from, let's say, an automobile or even from your mobile phone, right? So these are very, very basic. They're just like once in a while an abstract ping which just kind of comes in with just very basic information. So we had to kind of stitch together X different basic signals to be able to say, hey, does this particular device have a battery issue? Is the message calling out a little later? Could it be because of the fact that if a shop is there in the basement, and it's all running on a SIM card, right? So if it's there in the basement, chances are it's not going to work. And it's not a fault of the device, nor is it the fault of the merchant. It's just a function of that particular environment. Yeah. So being able to kind of stitch together all of these things and come up with a model which says that all of these merchants could possibly be going inactive because of these device related issues. And the thing about, at least for us, the offline way of working is PhonePe is very, very digital first company, right? So the entirety of consumer product, it functions very similar to Flipkart, Udaan, your go-to product firms out there. But the offline world works differently, because as much as I build all these products out, it is our fleet on the ground who actually operationalize whatever happens. They are our muscle, right? Which means that I need to be able to disseminate information the right way to tens and thousands or even a few lakhs when we were working on a freelancer model all across the country. And that's not going to happen unless otherwise it's prescriptive, right? So you always kind of got to know if I'm talking about a broader problem statement with, let's say, my GTM person, it's going to be a little bit more abstract. I'll be able to kind of just work with frameworks and so on. But if I were to be able to kind of get that done operationally, and let's say if I need to kind of tell that to Ashwin, I'll be like, Ashwin, you go do this. That's it. I don't want you to have too much of an opinion. All of those things are fine, but this is what I want you to do, is when it will work. So for that to happen, we had to go back, figure out whether this was a device related issue. Do we believe that we need to probably make the offer a little bit better because for this particular merchant it might be a little over their price point, or does this merchant think that they were getting charged X but they were actually getting charged X plus 10 or X plus 20? Maybe they didn't take into account the fact that this offer is applicable only if you cross this threshold. This particular thing, regardless of your offer, we will charge X rupees for, let's say, your SIM cost, whatever those structures are. Is it one where a particular merchant did not understand why is it that they were getting charged, whatever it was? And all of that attribution had to be done in a very structured way and then broken down into what my right channel of communication is. Because when I know that Shiva is a merchant and I know his device has a problem, I don't have to figure anything else out. I just need to say, go to Shiva, here is a task, and we have a certain workflow mechanism put in place. So if, let's say, Sardi is the person who's looking at my area, he's going to be flashed a task on his app which says, go to Shiva, change his SIM, try it. If it is still not working, swap his device. Maybe it's an issue with the device, right? Or the other probability is, if it is one where I believe that the merchant did not understand, then we have a certain app, just the way you have a PhonePe for consumers, you have a PhonePe for merchant, in which case the right communication needs to come in through the merchant app to say, hey, I'm again kind of showing you a very tailored message in terms of how our charges are broken up. Now that gives you a certain clarity, which if a merchant is still either unsure or needs to want more, then they get routed through our support desk where the clarification happens. So it is a classic problem of different attribution and being able to, in some shape and form with a certain degree of probability, attribute to what could be going on, and then correspondingly start figuring out what your treatment plans will have to be. And in certain cases, the treatment plans are very, very straightforward, which is go change the SIM card, or it is a little bit more entrance, saying that, okay, try this kind of a message on their app for 3 days. If it doesn't work, try an automated IVR. If it doesn't work, then we probably need to kind of do 1 degree by the agent. And there are also certain places where we might have to end up taking that call where we say, maybe the merchant has switched. Maybe it was never a need for the merchant. Try and get the device back. We'll do the right refund to the merchant if required, but let's at least get the device back so that can, essentially means that the asset per se isn't necessarily lost.
And diagnose the issue.
Not just, it's possible that Shiva's Shiva shop is in the 3rd basement. Regardless of whatever device you give me, my location means that I'm not going to be able to kind of use the device it is. So the device is just not right for Shiva. And that's a hard reality that especially a lot of business are like, you know what, my addressable market is the entirety of the country. Sure, that's the right way to look at it, but there is always going to be that scenario where we got to understand that certain merchants are not going to use it, and it's more of a wasted effort either from your side or from your sales team's resource standpoint to be able to continuously keep working with that particular merchant.
Yeah,
so
yes.
That's the problem statement that at least kind of comes to my mind, because as I said, it kind of goes like a saga, has multiple facets kind of coming in, but more than anything I thought that could be a little bit more relatable to some of the folks who will be listening into the episode as well. So
yeah, no, I think super interesting. Thank you for the comprehensive answer.
No
also
worries,
goes on to prove how much of analytics is actually business problem solving, more than numbers and data.
it is.
It is very
Precisely, I think people need to understand that models only give you some part of the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Large part of the answer is in this continuous investigation, continuous learning, and trying to go down the funnel, trying to dissect it, and keep solving.
Exactly.
And there's no end to it, actually. You'll keep solving it forever.
So in fact, especially over here, right? For this particular BU, what we realized worked fantastically well for the analysts who are either in the team or who are just joining. For the first 3-4 weeks, said, okay, while you're going through your induction, all of that stuff is there. We almost like mandated, saying that 2 days in a week for the first 4 weeks, we don't want to see your face in the office.
Okay.
Go to the field.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Talk
Because
to the customer.
sitting over here, right? This is probably one of the best examples that I give. Let's say I'm borrowing 200 rupees from you, Ankur. Ankur, right?
Yeah.
I'm borrowing 200 rupees from you, right? And I just forget to give it to you. probably you're not going to have that much of a challenge, and you'll be like, it's okay, yaar, assuming you and I know each other, right? But what we realize is, if let's say I'm going to be taking a pan wala, a pani puri wala, or so on, for those individuals, when their settlement happens the next day, and if there is any sort of delay or anything where that recon happens, for them that 200, that 500 is what they give for them to get the raw material. They don't work on the notion of credit, right? For them it is cash in, material out. So that small thing of 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees that the 5 people here in this room is not even going to give a second fleeting thought is going to actually impact one day of business for that particular individual. And that empathy is not something that a lot of people, we don't get, because we're not from that world, rightfully so. So that, like what Sadhya was mentioning, that continuous view, wherever possible, just plug it in. If you want to know about, what is working for your speakers, and you say, hey, you know what, these 15, 20 speakers went inactive in the last 1 week. Go to those stops, talk to them. And the simplest thing, and usually when you kind of just go and say, hey, is there anything wrong with the device? Or is there anything wrong? They will start from anything wrong with their business, the fact that their supplier is generally bad. They'll talk for 10 minutes and then they'll come to the device issue. But that's where it kind of comes to. And then you try and translate that back into data. So
I think just one add-on to that, which is probably a life advice for everybody. As much as you can get grounded into the problem, like even the problem that I mentioned on the supply chain routing, the moment you go there, you see the people do the routing, what are the challenges they face, then go with the drivers to the routes to see what challenges they face, what are the things. So building that domain knowledge, domain context is invaluable. There's nothing, no amount of mental exercise can give you that aha or step jump in your solution compared to just looking at the problem on the ground, seeing how it works, and that's about it.
Might be taking over, but just one last point over there. And forget about the work side. It opens up for some fantastically funny conversations. True story. There was one particular merchant. Typically, first half of the month, we were generally very active. Second half, not active at all. Like zero. When I'm talking first half active, like good amount of transactions. So we go there, and here was the story. The store was run by this father-son duo, right? And they're kind of coming from a certain background where the son's wife and kid are in a different city, and they kind of usually come in the second half of the month. The son is a PhonePe loyalist. The father is not. And there is a certain tiff happening between them. So what happens is, whenever when the son goes and spends time with his wife, his father makes sure that our QR is not there in the top. You are never going to get this with data. Right? Like, it was very funny to kind of have that conversation. I'm like, okay, you know what? I don't think we can help anything over here.
How are you going to model these family relations?
Yeah, you can't.
I think that's also important to learn, that you can't solve everything.
Yeah.
There is a Pareto always, you need to solve for it. You cannot try and solve every small scenario. That's much far away by the time we reach that stage.
The day when we're able to figure out this family relationship is a variable coming into the data, exactly. I don't think we will be required any longer. That's when the machines have taken over.
True. Yeah, Parth, why don't you go ahead with your problem statement?
See, I think complexity of problems, the way I see it, probably when you're doing at that moment, it feels complex. Later on in life, you figure out, okay, that could have been done better or faster, right? It's always, when you look back, it seems fundamentally, it was the intuitive way to do it. But when you're doing it, you do so many things, right? So there are many, maybe one I would say is at Udaan, again, Udaan Capital, right? So I joined from 2 large MNCs, CTA and Z. 150 plus years companies have set process, everything, how to do everything from a risk standpoint, how do you underwrite customer, how do you give limits, everything is well defined. You learned all of that, you mastered the processes, right? Or the understanding of. But when you come to a startup and Udaan, you have a bunch of customers who don't, all the data points you are used to at this organization, none of those are available. None, literally, right? Nobody is going to give you a bank statement. You might have some bit of bureau, but again, large portion will not have bureau. So how do you underwrite? How do you determine what is the right limit?
Yeah.
Right? So that was a problem statement. And when I joined, I was Chaitanya, who hired me, said, okay, this is the first thing you need to solve. All the category guys keep complaining you're not giving the right limit, so our customers are not purchasing. Right? And this is a typical chicken and egg problem where you say, because there is no limit, customers are not purchasing. But because customers are not purchasing, you don't want to give limits. Because if they don't purchase and if they don't frequently transact, they will default.
Yeah.
So how do you decide that? So that's been the first problem statement, and I had to unlearn everything I had learned and start from fundamentals. Okay, how do customers think? What is the motivation of these merchants to come to Udaan? How do you ensure that at least your NPAs are in control? Because unlike offline world, everything gets reported to bureau and it impacts your own rating of the organization and a lot of other things down the line, right? So understanding that domain and going back and say, okay, you start with small amounts and keep continuously dynamically increasing, but always showing them you always have room to purchase and explaining that to our stakeholders and categories. And it's a hard problem because for them, GMV.
Yeah.
For Udaan Capital, I need to balance growth as well as NPA. It's not one off, right?
Exactly.
It's extremely important to manage NPA because long term, otherwise we are dead. So that is the problem, which is, I would say, execution wise, we can figure out something, but the challenge is probably more in convincing people, explaining to stakeholders and customers, giving consistent experience, especially when you work with multiple lenders. You're not the only lender, you work with multiple lenders. So convincing all the other lenders of the risk policy, it makes intuitive sense and it is working. That itself was, I would say, a journey, but there are many such things. But like I said, now if I look back, that sounds sensible. Why did it feel complex at that point in time? So I would say it's looking back, things change, but
Yeah.
So balancing growth and NPAs is, I know it's difficult task.
I mean, lending is one place. Everybody is very comfortable. I mean, you just go out and give. I want to give you 1 lakh. Do you think anybody will say? The problem is not in disbursals. Everybody is focused on disbursal growth. That happens. Risk will bite you after many months. And most lending organizations, if you don't plan for it, you're set for failure.
Yeah.
So
Because once you have given out lending, especially personal loans kind of thing, if you have given out, recovery, if you have a long time, you will realize after 6 months down the line that you made a mistake. And it's very difficult to claw it back.
Cycles are long also.
Yeah, so it depends on the product, but it is very important decision in a lending space around. You should not just focus on growth.
Yeah.
So how did data science come in this picture? How did you solve this problem with data science?
So you look at the patterns of how frequently are these retailers purchasing on Udaan, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is their affinity, or if you will, you can say something like, what is the frequency at which they'll come back to Udaan will tell you and what is the typical purchase pattern you will get to know, right? So let's say every 15 days these guys are coming back and they're going to transact 5,000. Then you give limit in such a way that it enables them to go to 10,000.
Yeah.
Once they move up, then you increase it further. But at any point in time, based on their repayment pattern, you increase the limit, not based on their purchase pattern. That's where the typical disconnect used to be with categories. The person has already purchased. Why don't you increase? He doesn't have enough limit. You say, as long as he repays, we'll give a multiplier above it so that it solves. And of course, it's linked to the riskiness of the customer. In terms of the underwriting, we also assess what is the riskiness of the customer from bureau, or the, let's say, relatively less inactive customer versus fairly regular, very everyday transacting versus once in a week transacting is very different, right? So all of those go into the model to figure out the riskiness. Riskiness in conjunction with the repayment behavior will help you determine risk aligned limits. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I think hearing all three problem statements, I think these are like dream problem statements to work on. Actually, translating that business problem into, let's say, model and then solving for it using data science. Very, very interesting. Someone entering this space would really take inspiration from the kinds of problems that you're solving at scale. People come back from the US to India to solve these kinds of problems. Even after, for example, Mohit came back to India to solve such problems. I think really, really impactful, and this is what we call impact, and that can only happen, I think, in India. I think we can talk one aspect here, just quickly want to touch upon, and specifically this is for Parth. Analytics at large organizations versus startups. You've seen banks, right, Citi and ANZ, and maybe Udaan, WeRize. So how do you compare things there? And maybe, if Mohit, such a thing.
Fairly different, I would say. In one place, I think large organizations have very good people, process, and culture is a lot more focused on one aspect, I would say, because they're more mature and they've set up over the years how things work, and lot more processes are designed so that it's not dependent on an individual, I would say. That's generally how it's set up. At the same time, I would again differentiate between a KPO versus an Indian setup, because in KPO, like Mohit said, the core on-ground decisions happen typically in those markets. There is no choice, because when something changes in that market real time, you need to make decisions quickly. You cannot sit remotely, try and understand it. You naturally don't keep track of what's happening. Let's say I'm sitting here, I will not naturally keep track of what's happening in Vietnam on a day-to-day basis, right? To be able to react to that environment. So in that sense, the work which comes to the Indian market is typically a lot more structured problem statement in a project mode, right? Whereas if you're working for a Indian market, you get to see end to end, unstructured. It's a lot more unstructured, it's lots more dynamic, and you can actually, the advantage, like we've been talking about, you have an actual advantage to go and visit the customer, which is very difficult to do it anywhere else, right? So here you actually should do it, and it definitely helps to understand, because sitting in a room you can make a lot of hypotheses, but the basement hypothesis will not naturally come always, unless you have seen that example, right? So hypothesis creation also comes when you are on ground, and that way the nature of work is different, whereas the depth, you might go into the depth and the volume of data you would have. Again, that's changing in India, but based on the problem environment, but the depth and the methodological complexity can be higher in KPOs, but it depends again on the problem statement you're solving. I think it's equally complex, and the methodologies have evolved even in India. So that's.
So I guess if I'm getting this correct, so fundamentals are same if you
Yes.
work in large organization
Yes.
or startup, but the only difference is how you approach the problem, basically.
Yeah, and how I would say visibility to the end-to-end journey.
That's more in
That's
startup.
also probably more.
So I think one other aspect is the scope of what you are able to do. That is clearly very, very different at different organizations. When we're talking about this, and you asked to contrast big companies versus small, what I'll share particularly from data science, or at least my during the Flipkart stint, we would go to, let's say, research conferences, right, international research conferences. And there I would meet my alma mater folks, who are very senior folks, senior researchers in all big corporates, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, you name the companies. Now, when we were having discussion, for example, at that point in time, one incident that I am recalling, I was looking at search at Flipkart. But that is responsibility as a data scientist. That time my role was just data scientist. I had visibility and responsibility of the entire search stack. There was no cuts, meaning you start with auto suggest to search ka query understanding to search ranking to personalization. All the problem statements are your responsibility, and you have the purview for it. But at a conference, when I'm talking to a researcher, very senior researcher, 2 decades senior to me, or a decade senior to me, at big companies, they have, let's say, worked on just search ranking. Mm-hmm. When I ask a question about search semantics or personalization, they haven't gotten exposure to it. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's a massive difference. The smaller the company, the bigger scope of work that you would have seen. And I think if you were to put the dimensions, it will be more unstructured, less processy, but more scope, higher scope, and
Faster learning.
Faster
Faster
learning.
learning.
So I think that's a very, very key difference. My career has moved from organized big research labs to now startups, and that's essentially the sort of trajectory, or so to say, the scope increasing, fuzziness increasing, structure reducing, processes reducing.
I do have a point of view which might not necessarily be the most popular opinion though, because like usually when you're kind of talking to relatively younger folks or whatnot, their notion is, this company X is way too large. What is it that I'm going to learn over there? And like I want to join in this smaller firm where like everything is hustly and whatnot. And I genuinely believe that sometimes you gotta take that call depending on where you are and what is it that you want to achieve, right? So as much as there's somebody who doesn't necessarily have any experience in analytics, let's say you're fresh out of college, right? I'm not saying that such an individual, he or she, should not have, let's say, that want to join the Flipkarts or the Facebooks of the world, right? But at the same time, a larger organization do teaches a lot of things that a smaller organization does not. It genuinely kind of teaches you what it means to set up a certain process. It means, or you kind of get that exposure of, let's say, pedal to the metal, getting stuff done. You are given a certain responsibility. I'm going to get that done in the best possible way. And that is what I'm going to be owning up for. So some of these, let's say, boring, yes, but very required behavioral aspects are things that larger organizations do definitely teach. And as I said, throughout your journey, if you're able to kind of attach a certain tag as to why you are making a certain job switch, or why is it that you are choosing company A over company B, as long as you have a story and you're sold on that story, it's good. But a larger organization does provide these benefits, which compounds over a certain period of time. Right?
Yeah, so it's a very personal call. You cannot say that startup provides more learning. You cannot generalize. Yeah.
I think and I relate to that in the sense that at a startup you can have a hit or miss.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. Just being in a startup doesn't mean you learn crazy stuff. You need people to learn from.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You need that setup to learn from. By the way, this sort of reminds me of a discussion we had at a research conference where the panelists were all PhDs. 2 of them were startup founders. 2 of them were faculties. And the topic of discussion was whether students should go for a PhD or go join startup. Right? This is
academia versus
correct. And at least a decade ago, this was a discussion. Why should somebody bother to get a PhD? Why not join a company and learn on the job? You have all the research opportunities. Applied ML, applied research is very much there. The point that came out at the conclusion of that thing was where you get your learning opportunity matters. You can have a shitty PhD advisor and you don't learn anything. Or you can have a bad startup and not learn anything, right? Just by being there doesn't mean anything. So you can have a great learning experience during your PhD or likewise at a company as well. As long as there are mentors, there are learning opportunities, there are these setups that help you improve. In a startup, if you just go the first analytics person, you don't know how to approach, how to set things up, that may not help you, right? And that's not the best career path that you say, okay, I'll just go Rambo style and I'll be able to do anything. So his point is extremely grounded and very valid that you need to be able to learn the tricks of the trade, understand them, and then expand your horizon, so to say, and that can happen. Everybody has to choose their own path. That's the other.
So the crux is that in large organization, you get a mentor and that's a pro, right? In a startup, if you get a mentor, then that would be a good learning opportunity, but breadth of learning would be much more in a startup.
Again, it's
Again,
conditioned
I think
on
generalization
everything.
is the
Yes. Generalization
I think
is
the
the
problem.
what we are realizing, we should not generalize it so
Yeah.
quickly. It is a complex one. It depends on the situation and the luck.
So, as in to your point, as you said, at a big company, you will have a mentor and you will learn. You need to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
If it's not happening, then you don't have a good learning setup where you are not learning fast enough, and learning that aspect, and you don't have good mentors and good peers around, then that hypothesis doesn't hold true.
Yeah, and talking about complex problem statements, I think another, and this was very, very valuable, another point I want to touch upon is, talking about the skills aspect itself, machine learning versus data science versus analytics versus AI. And this is again a very complex one. Is there of course, there's no boundary, but then how do you make those sets and subsets and intersections? Can you maybe help, maybe collectively draw one diagram wherein we can see the intersections, overlaps, and sets and subsets within these four? Analytics. So maybe I can start. AI may be a bigger set. There may be some overlap with analytics. Then there will be some. So ML will be a subset of AI, and maybe and
We might have very different opinions,
exactly.
I
but
think-
these are all terms. I wouldn't really try
Exactly.
to-
So I think just as soon as you said AI and ML is a subset of AI, you
Lost
get
the
lost.
plot.
Yeah. See, the terminologies have evolved and been abused so much. Now, what is data science? It's sort of overloaded. So I don't think that kind of an exercise makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Okay, for a change, let me pose the question back to you, right? So, let's say if the three of us are able to kind of give a certain magical one diagram, right? And if, let's say, that diagram is shown to your listeners, what is it that you're hoping for them to get from it?
I think
let's come
that's
from
a
that
valid,
point of
very
view.
valid point. So the question here is, people do ask, where do we draw a boundary? When do I learn data analytics? When do I go for data science? So I've learned a few skills. When do I become a data scientist from becoming, let's say, a data analyst? So that's the intent. But I know it's a very, very tough task, and I'm not expecting us to get to an answer. But then, within even data analytics and data science, maybe I think there's a particular level after which you say that I am now a data scientist, or I have those skills required for becoming a data scientist. So I think that's my say. But
if I can take a shot,
Yeah.
I would say, instead of focusing on I'm a data scientist or not, I would say people need to focus on solving the problem. What are the problem you're trying to solve? What are the different ways you can try and solve it, and learn whatever is required to solve the problem.
Yeah.
As part of the journey, you will figure out what is required to solve that problem, and then you'll naturally learn many things. Actually, you cannot define for this problem this is the skill you need, because, like we all said, if you have to solve the problem end to end, you anyway need to learn everything.
Yeah.
Right? If you have to eventually grow, you have to learn all parts of the funnel,
Right.
and you cannot learn one part of it. So focus on the problem, and to solve that, whatever is required, you can research, and you have enough material now everywhere to figure out what is required to solve that problem. If you need guidance, you will have people mentoring, but that's one approach.
Yeah. So one aspect that I'll sort of clarify, maybe take a shot at, is what are the core skills that are there. So like just taking Udaan as an example, because we had distinct teams, data science and analytics. What are the core skills that would distinguish the role,
Definitely.
right? If that helps. So a data science core skill starts from sort of the core math and the ML part of it, the machine learning part of it, where not just the usage of library, but understanding, like for example, one of the classic interview questions that we used to ask was derive a logistic regression model. Right? So somebody to be able to explain the loss function, explain what it means, to be able to derive that equation and whatnot. So that's a core skill in terms of understanding the maths
yeah.
of models, understanding the models thus in great depth, so that once that base is there, then you get to deep learning. One of the basic things is neural network derives itself from logistic. So all of that sort of builds up, right? So that's a core skill or dimension that is there for data scientists. An analyst is not expected to have that depth of understanding of the math and modeling. The analytics tool set around the core competency around data analysis, hypothesis, from hypothesis, doing the core detailed analysis to figure out those things are the core skill set from an analyst perspective. The things that are common are the domain understanding, all roles need to have a very deep domain understanding, or what you call product understanding as well. A data scientist needs it, an analyst needs it as well, right? Would I say one role needs more, the other? There's no sort of fine
that
distinction.
journey is kind of fungible if you think about it, right? Your core foundations, whether you're getting into the complex statistical aspects, or even for you to use a more simpler aspect of statistics, right? Even if it is significance testing, which is probably bare bones minimum, you able to kind of utilize it in the right way goes a much longer way as compared to using a model technique for the sake of using a model technique. Your foundation still remain the same. How well do you know / understand data? How well do you know domain your business, and how comfortable you are with technology remains the foundation. And I just think that again, this is at least back in Mu Sigma, right? There are folks like me who was lucky enough to start work in a project that happened to have some aspect of machine learning or statistical modeling involved. A whole bunch of people were working in what we kind of call today as traditional reporting projects. And even there were some folks who were in my team who were like, this math doesn't talk to me that well. I'm comfortable enough to work more on business because I understand that much better. So that is always going to be, as an intersection, it's very, very closely interwoven. What matters, or what is more critical, is if your foundations over here are strong enough, then the others are transferable skill sets, and it comes down to your inclination as well. I can be very honest, the degree of stats that right now, let's say Mohit understands, I don't think I have the inclination, nor do I have that interest to be able to do what Mohit does. And the question only kind of comes down to, are you comfortable enough to say, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the necessary skill sets for that, or I'm not willing to put in that much of effort, which is also a conscious call that you take. But certain aspects, until where my boundary lies, I'll do that, right? And that's where it kind of goes through. And it's what we also see is a lot of the data scientists say that I'm going to operate only on the statistical aspect of things, which we also, I think, the three of us have been kind of pointing out. That's not going to work, because at the end of the day, when you want something to get implemented, you come back to foundations, right? Just because a model says so, we know that the human ego is much powerful than what a statistical model says, right? Or the ability to kind of talk back the language that is required is where it kind of matters. And it just comes back to that particular person, where he or she is, and how they want to drive their journey forward is completely up to them. It's very much possible that you can be very, very successful being only on the quote-unquote business analytics side, be able to straddle a little bit of both, or say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be more on the core side, as long as your foundations remain the same.
Got it. So to sum this discussion up, there are three aspects, right? One is the research mindset, second is the problem solving ability, basically coding and all, and third is the understanding the business domain, business context. And you have to lie in the middle, right? Mainly towards domain expertise, you got to get that in all the roles that have the data science. But this is what the picture actually is.
And wherever you lie in these three skills, maybe if you're shifted more towards the first two, then you probably become a data analyst, or maybe if you shift to the last two, you become a business analyst versus a data scientist who may be across the board. So I think that's where the right balance of these three, I believe, maybe how people who want to enter this domain can think about these roles, because they are not when you think about freshers, right, or people wanting to enter this industry even after 5-6 years of work experience in another industry, these are the kinds of questions they have, that what does a business analyst do, how does that differ from the job of a business from a data scientist, data analyst. And I think we did a very good job. This definitely is going to become a key moment in the YouTube video. And because this is a very, very frequently asked question.
Well, I think what is happening, and I don't know if that leads to your segue of next sort of the GenAI bit, but what is happening now with the newer set of where the world is going, I think at least I'm not able to foresee any of the discussion that we are having is sort of grounded in the past. It's getting changed very, very fast. Right? So, for example, the core data science skill may become redundant. Like, I don't need to ever understand that detailed model unless I am creating those fundamental models. Right? A small set of folks are building those fundamental models. They are the ones who need to do that. Even if I'm fine tuning, still I am not doing any math. I am a user of a library at best, right? So from a data science perspective, that field is changing extremely fast. From an analytics perspective, again, it is changing very fast because with text to SQL and all of those things coming in, now where does that strength lie? Like creating a SQL query is no longer a very, very unique skill, so to say, with the advent of the disruptive things that are happening. In all of this, the thing that at least to me stands out is the domain context, domain knowledge, understanding the problem statement, and that's where the human expertise essentially will still be there to solve a problem statement. These are tools that are going to be available. Data scientists might be using different tools, analysts might be using different tools. But to solve a problem, you need to have the domain context and then approach it. But again, a crystal ball, 4 years, 5 years down the line, if we were to set up a data science team in an org, what kind of interview we'll be taking? Is a very different question.
Exactly.
Assuming the interview happens by a person.
So yeah, and I was shying away from answering this question from, let's say, like Udaan, we had these different job roles,
Exactly, exactly.
right? And we had these different profiles, and just a interview round defines what kind of skills that you're looking for, right? It's changing. That's why I didn't want to stress okay, no, data science is this, analyst is this, and this is this. World is changing, right?
But
So-
there would be some top 3 or 4 qualities that you would look in a fresher. Probably we could elaborate this question. Suppose a fresher comes for interview, a master's student comes for interview, and a PhD candidate comes for an interview. So what are 3 or 4 qualities that you look in them?
Fair. So I can qualify, for example, for sure the PhD and the master's one. Usage of library is one. When things don't work, who is able to make hypothesis of what could have gone wrong and be able to iterate on it? Whether it's I need to do this, X, Y, Z, this could be the reason. Those errors, because if a library works out of the box, then anybody can do it. You don't need any skill differentiation, correct? If things don't work, then there is a skill differentiation that comes into play. That's it. That's as simple as that. At least that's the page I am on with the GenAI.
100%.
Aligned with that.
So, I mean, aligning with this thing, one thing which I used to do in my college days was pick up a random library like NumPy or SciPy, for example, and then get into that library, or probably some Microsoft build a tool. Get into that tool and understand how they are coding it, how they are referencing to different objects inside the code. And this helped me to, how should I put this? Backtrack their thought process and get into the things. So I guess for our audience, that might be a bit helpful, that if you are preparing for data science analytics role, then you can do this kind of exercise.
My viewpoint, okay, so as I said, if I'll break this up into 2 things, right? The one thing that we typically look for, and this is what Mohit was saying as well, like if everything is fine and dandy, everything is fine. But if something breaks, the ability for somebody to just be able to break a problem down to its core constituencies and whatnot, that ability, that problem solving is what we kind of look for. And where a lot of people, at least some of the, whether it's freshers or relatively younger folks, maybe might falter is a misconception that in an interview, if Shiva or Sadi or Mohit is posing a question, their immediate thing is, you know what, I am going to solve it to the very last full stop and put the end and then package it back to them. That's probably not going to be the requirement more of 9 out of 10 times. What typically at least I look for is that person able to work with me? Because that's how it functions. If I'm going to be part of his team, the chances of the both of us talking something and him putting out an idea, me catching up on it, me building my own perspective, that's how life works, right? It's never going to be he's going to be like, yo, do this, goes away, 3 weeks back, comes back, is not how it usually functions, right? So when you're at least when you're practicing or whatnot, the notion of, hey, I am going to spend some time to truly understand where your problem is, rather than saying, you know what, this is my solution, doesn't work, right? That innate curiosity to be able to say, okay, this is how I am thinking about it. Do you think that makes sense? Do you think that doesn't make sense? Am I taking wrong assumptions? That is where, as an interviewer, you are able to kind of get a sense of, is he or she thinking through? When I give you a small hint, are you able to take that down and go further? Or you can still stick with the point of view. That point of view might be incorrect, but more often than not, be like, you don't understand the domain context, but you're able to think through. At the end, when I say, hey, but this is a viewpoint that you hadn't taken into account, you're like, oh yeah, probably, sure. But with your limited context, I don't expect somebody coming in to know the 5 years of PhonePe context that I have, right? So when they just kind of go through and just have that broader conversation from a problem solving standpoint, that is one where either a fresher or even somebody looking to get into the space will be able to kind of do well. And the other aspect, and I've seen a few candidates do this and it sticks out, right? Which is, if you are saying that, hey, you know what, I want to get into this space, which is the NumPy, SciPy, even if it is SQL, Tableau, whatever it is, there is no dearth of free data sets out there. So if you want to make your case, why don't people put it up on their resumes?
Demonstration of
exactly. So I play basketball over the weekend, and I'm a big basketball lover. So I can be like, I'm just going to take a data set, Kaggle, whatever it is, and just kind of take a certain problem statement. I will make up my own question. I'm like, oh, if this particular team would have gone to the finals, would they have won? It's just a simple problem statement that I ask myself. I put this, and you have Tableau, all of these things which have the public version. I tag it to my resume, and that sticks out.
But Shiva, still, it's 2024. You can't be building, I guess, models on Titanic dataset or Iris Flower dataset. So what kind of projects are you talking about here?
Yeah, just doubling down on that. We
Sure.
agree with that, but then maybe if you can give me some examples here.
So okay, let me just ask the contrarian question back to you. Why can I not still build a modeling dataset? A model on a Titanic dataset. Why can I not?
Let me do a meta commentary on what he said. He didn't ask a regular question. He created a different question on that dataset. Like, if this team had gone then finals, this you will not find in any of those tests or a regular thing. Now, the point about Kaggle, you're absolutely right in saying that Iris has been beaten to death and Titanic has been beaten to death. And that's a fact. Anybody who sort of overhinges on Kaggle and I've done Kaggle and I've done this, it's like you've ripped off a library and you've run some code, you don't understand it, you executed a notebook, a Google Colab notebook or something. That if that's the end of your understanding, then that's that. But his point was very different. It's not that. You really had the intent to learn. I'll narrow it down to even further, which is what we look for. At least that's the litmus test for me. The eagerness to learn and the ability to learn, the intent to go deep. That demonstrated however it is demonstrated. Right? And there is no script to it. He called out one script. You take some data set, you create your own problem statement, you tell me you did something, you thought about it deeply, that you will not be able to rip off from a library, and you demonstrate that to me, that will stick out. Again, you're talking about something sticking out. If you tell a recipe, then that's like Kaggle and ripping off a library, and then that's that, right? So sticking out means you've done something that required effort, required deep thinking, required you to demonstrate that, and you demonstrated that somehow. So that has to be an individual's effort on demonstrating that. It cannot be a script for sure.
So the things are same. The way to look at it, the perspective matters, and how you solve it, that matters.
That's a signal that you're giving, right? Saying that I've done something out of my own interest. And what that opens up, right? Especially if you're just trying to get inside, you don't have too many projects for you to talk about. That becomes a certain place where if Sarathy looks at it like, oh, this is interesting. If you take certain common things like movies, chances are that a lot of people see movies. If it is cricket, I don't know if there is a data set on Kaggle for cricket, but let's assume it isn't. Chances are that most people would like to talk about cricket. So if you're a cricket enthusiast or whatnot, it just opens up a conversation about something that you don't have necessarily a lot of things to talk about. And when that happens, you're sending the right signals back saying that this is what I've done. I could be right, I could be wrong. But I'm willing to put, even if I'm incorrect, this is my point of view. Now, if the person on the other side brings a different point of view, I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting. That's something which I did not necessarily think about. And chances are that if in that particular company you didn't make it, and if you're smart enough, you'll take that point of view, rebuild it, and then just rehash it. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And more than anything, right, that is a much better pitch for somebody saying that, hey, I'm looking to get into analytics. These 3-4 things are things that I've done. Would you mind looking at it? As compared to, hey, I want to get into analytics. Here is my resume. Are there any openings? Two very, very different starting points altogether, right?
Yeah.
Changes the game, changes the playing field that you're in.
The whole narrative.
There's a hook right now for you.
Yeah. And Saradhi, what do you think about this? Maybe I think we've gotten perspectives from both of them, but what do you look for in a candidate? And I think this is a gold mine for people watching this. And I hope that a lot of people benefit out of whatever we are talking about right now.
Very similar. Probably one other thing I typically look for is sincerity. In the sense, eventually the person needs to exhibit intent to work and do improve, right? And be sincere about it. So one big issue for me is anybody writes something on resume, bolds it, and then says, I've done very limited or I don't know much. Please be sincere on what you write. Only write what you know. Don't write something which you haven't really understood or know enough about, at least. Yes, generally people do mark it up, that I know, but at least do not highlight it, especially if you are not confident about it, right? So that's one. Other is curiosity, right? So people have seen this where people say, okay, especially when I apply for a fintech, they say, I want to work in the finance domain. That's my passion and all of this, right? Just trying to align to the job. That's common. And I say, okay, if there's sincerely passionate, then I ask a strong common question. Are you curious enough to check the curiosity? Ask, why do you think banks give debit card? Just an open question, right? So if just people are even remotely interested, they will try to, every time they do something, they'll try to figure out how that works, why it works, kind of thing, right? So that curiosity is something which I look for, apart from the analytical things which we talked about, is something which, these are two things which I look for.
I'm taking this idea back, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm taking this idea back.
I'm very, very sure like people will really benefit out of this, and I'm also very sure that people will come back to me after we release the podcast that because of what Shiva said, because of what Parth said, right? Maybe I did that and I got an interview call and maybe proceeded and got the final.
The downside is we both of us will have to change the questions now. I gave away one question, you've given away one question.
That's
So
okay. Bunch of products in financial.
yeah. On a lighter
I think
note.
so. I do run a course. I'm an instructor in a Coding Ninjas boot camp, right? And these are the questions we get. That this is, I think, the most frequently asked question. And on that note, I also want to understand one aspect since we are on this topic right now. Do online courses or boot camps help? And how much? Of course they help. But then, how do you look at the online courses as a hiring manager? What's your say on that? And this should be a very, very kind of
Yes, no
we may have contradictory opinions here, and you can even say yes or no. I mean, very, very open.
My view is just looking at the course, I don't decide good or not.
Okay.
If some way during the conversation it comes out that that course helped and they are able to exhibit that as part of the problem of question, that's when I realized there was some value the person gained from that course. Otherwise, it is just because everybody nowadays can do online courses.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype around data science courses at least.
Yes, definitely.
And maybe breaking a lot of bubbles here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that we
Chances of resume when it is being seen, the fact that you've done a course might not even stick to your interviewer's eyes 9 out of 10 times or 19 out of 100 times.
This is going out in reels.
Yeah. You guys are going to make me viral for the wrong reasons. But
this is valid.
no, so it comes back to the same thing. Like there are broader questions in terms of authenticity of those courses. All of that is there. But while you doing a course, see, if you're doing a course because you're going to get an interview at vishwa.ai, chances are that that might not happen. But if you're taking a course so that you'll be able to crack the interview at vishwa.ai, that could help.
Yes.
All of that coming back to the previous point at hand, which is, are you able to get your foot in the door by showing something? Or even if your resume is generally good enough, where if you've had a certain thing and let's say in your resume, if you did a course and if you kind of linked what is it that you've learned from that, that foot in the door will help you only that. It will just take you to the door. Now, if you've relied on the fundamentals of what the course has taught, and if you're able to tie it back in, that is what is going to help. Just doing a course is, I don't think it's going to help people. At least when I look at a resume, I don't see that. It does not strike my eye at all. But when I'm talking to somebody at a later point in time, if they said, "Hey, I did this course. I was a software engineer. I did a course. It was good enough. It helped me. Now I'm working as a business analyst in a smaller organization. Now I want to come to PhonePe." I'm like, okay, that's where the journey lies. So there lies a certain point in your story which allowed for that pivot to happen, and that sticks in my head. But chances are that I might not necessarily shortlist a resume, or a resume might not get shortlisted because of the fact that they have a course from
They've done the course.
Coursera, Udemy, whoever it is. And that was one of the assumptions that we had in our edtech startup which failed. So this is a point that I have a very strong opinion on.
Learn from your own mistakes. Learn from others' mistakes also.
So a couple of things. One is whenever somebody has asked me this, I've shared two anecdotes. One is, if you've seen the movie Three Idiots, whatever Ranchod Das says is valid, right? Like, बच्चा वो करो जिसमें मजा आता है, and course करो for the sake of learning, not for the sake of just doing the course and showing it in your resume. So as he said, again, the core point is that demonstrating that eagerness to learn. If your course is able to show that, okay, you did not have the opportunity, you're coming from a college where they did not have great faculty, etc., thus you took initiative and you took this course sincerely, and you have particularly Coursera certification course rather than just Coursera course, yes, that carries some weight, only to the extent that you are able to demonstrate that you know the subject. So just that, it's just becoming way too common for those courses. There's an interesting anecdote, particularly for freshers. We look at CVs in bunch. Guys, we look at CVs in bunch. All projects which are common are struck out.
Yes.
As simple as that. You see one CV and, oh, usne ye bhi kiya hai. And then you see the second CV, oh, isne bhi ye kiya. And everybody copies the CV, everybody copies the same projects. It doesn't have any information. It's all background noise. It cancels out. So if somebody has actually the intent to learn, and if it goes negative, because you're saying you're doing bhed chal, you're just whatever is the CV builder that is happening, joined 5 clubs, secretary of this, hold this, that. The faculties also know. It's like you guys have destroyed them. In order for them to be able to add a line item, they are doing this activity of did fundraise for tech. This एक call किया alumni को and did fundraise for the tech fest. Doesn't help, right? Those are all supporting sidebars. Once you have shown your skill, then all of these things come in as supporting evidence. In case there is a discussion that does this guy have that core innate ability or eagerness to learn? Yes, he's done this course. Yes, he's done demonstrated learning via this. He's taken the opportunity. He's taken the effort to try to demonstrate all of that. That's the only extent of to which that it helps. But do it for the sake of learning, not for the sake of CV at all.
There's one more point to add, especially for the freshers who write stuff on their resume, right? One other thing that usually works, and again it comes back to that same genuinity aspect of it. If PhonePe, Flipkart, Amazon, Cred, whoever comes to your respective campus, probably spend 20 minutes to build a perspective on the company that you're kind of getting into, right? And chances are that you're going to be asked this question of, hey, do you have any questions for us? And the number of lost opportunities that are there in that, not to show that, hey, I'm a smart person. That smartness of yours has already been determined already in the last 30 minutes or 40 minutes that has happened, right? Here, it is the notion of what is it that you want to know, what is it that you believe if you join, you're going to be able to kind of get. And the more you are able to kind of read about that particular company, have your point of view, and that point of view might be completely incorrect. Right? There are folks who we interviewed who are still in PhonePe, and at that particular point in time, they asked questions where all of their assumptions were incorrect, like completely incorrect. But they said that, hey, I was going through this product, I was not able to understand why you are building it. Is this why you are building it? This is why I think it is the case. Can you let me know something about it? And that sparked a conversation, and what kind of essentially happened. And as I said, that didn't necessarily change the course of whether I was going to select the particular person or not. But there are always going to be certain, again, perceptions that is kind of built, or even certain things like where in the potential case, where especially if it's going to be a larger number of people getting recruited and whatnot, where you have very little differences between those two. These smaller things matter, right? And as I said, not just matters from the point of view of an interview, it again is a view that you are getting, which in case PhonePe doesn't work out, the next PhonePe that comes in, you'll be able to kind of build that same point of view. So that lost opportunity, that opportunity which a lot of people get, I just say like, what is the most complicated project that you worked on? Like, how cool is the office? Those things help, sure, but you could be kind of putting it for better use.
Yeah, no, I think
Is this becoming a how to crack interview? The freshers to crack the campus
This will
interview,
be
right?
useful actually for the people who are listening.
this section was typically about skills and cracking roles, but I think but my students will not be happy after this conversation.
So if their takeaway was courses don't work, that's not the takeaway.
I'm getting thrown out as an instructor.
Now we know what part is not going to come on your podcast.
No. I think
Editing
this
room.
was super valuable. Will definitely, I think. Now I think we want to switch gears to AI for a bit, right? And I think.
So yeah, I think let's start with generative AI, which is, I mean, the talk of the street right now. So first question is like, how will this generative AI transform the Indian ecosystem? Right. Now this is a very broad question, right? There are many branches to it, but is it different from .com bubble? Right? First question is that. Second, will it bring an impact in the Indian startup ecosystem? And third, how can we beat the West in this?
Yeah, so generally the opportunities that GenAI brings for us, right? Later on, we'll also talk about the threats. Right? So we want to do a SWOT analysis kind of a thing. First the opportunities, maybe even the strengths, then the threats and maybe even the weaknesses. So I think opportunities we want to start with, and I think Mohit is super.
Given the chance, I'll switch over and sit on that chair and be able to kind of look at Mohit. But yeah.
So this is interesting, the India story for GenAI, right? So I think first is it's as they say, GenAI has become a sort of a democratizing factor. Like anybody sitting in Bay Area versus anywhere else on the globe has the same know-how. Because hey, the model was released a week ago. What else? What more do you know? Like the research paper, the way things are moving, papers coming out now. It used to happen that the research coteries or the groups had preview information. They would get the information 6 months ahead, a year ahead, if you are in the right circles of what's coming, etc. That's no longer the case. The area itself is moving so fast, and then most of it is happening in public, the open source as well. That has truly become a democratizer. Now, that's one. So anybody sitting in India versus Bay Area or anywhere else on the globe, do they have a disadvantage? Not really. It's there. But do we see Mistral or Hugging Face or a lot of these core companies coming out of India yet? Not quite. Right. So I think that's the opportunity that needs to be grabbed in India from a startup ecosystem perspective. I'm recently amazed by, well, it might be marketing, but what Kritrim did, right? It might be marketing because everybody gives free. Moving from Azure to claiming to now have an Indian cloud service. That's solid. That's the trend in the right direction. That's a step in the right direction, that we need to have these kind of services homegrown coming from India. So GenAI space democratized. Core research, unfortunately, is still very much focused in the big tech companies because of all the resources that it requires, the ability to throw tens of hundreds of millions of dollars without expecting any outcome. That kind of appetite, that kind of institutions don't exist in India just yet. Right? So that is a gap that exists. But democratize, if somebody was to create that, there doesn't seem like any reason why it cannot be done in India. From a startup ecosystem perspective, startups, there are areas, layers of GenAI in different spaces. People are competing, starting with the core models to the model serving serverless, to the optimization, to application layer where Vishwa is sitting. We don't necessarily see a handicap compared to anywhere else. Awesome startups are coming out from India competing in these space, except the foundation models. Pretty much every other space, there are exceptional startups. If anything, the advantage is a capital advantage that we have. At least our workings and what we've gotten anecdotal workings from Bay Area in terms of how many resources do you need to reach a certain ARR and whatnot. This looks favorable to us, right? If anything, we should be able to do this much more capital efficiently, just like our Mars mission and Agnikul launched recently. So the capital efficiency advantage that we have, the democratizer that we have, so the that enables it. From a funding perspective, it is still hit or miss. I'll probably know a month or 2 months down the line whether we have how easy an access to funds and how easy it is to do fundraise here versus there. Well, I would not know that side of story, but anecdotally everybody has said it's easier to raise in US, very hard to raise in India, but hopefully the story is changing, and I would at least hope so. That don't have to sort of look at completely doing a US based stuff rather than India based stuff. There are lots of interest, but again, until they materialize and we have a point of view, I'm not in a position to say one way or the other just yet. But that's one other perspective. So yeah, democratized, we should be able to. Right now there is a gap. The GPU availability in the country is a big challenge still. Yeah, that's where the lay of the land is in terms of startups or the GenAI opportunity. One other bit is there are a lot of business models in India, particularly which are going to get disrupted, like the entire services industry, which has been a massive base of employment in India. That is going to get disrupted in bulk. So that's why, like the first half of conversation, we were talking about 3 to 4 years down the line, what will the ecosystem look like? What will the skill set look like? Is very much up in the air, and the skills required. The questions that you are asking, what skills should you demonstrate? Quite honestly, at the back of my heart, I don't quite know. The reason I'm saying that is the models are indeed becoming so powerful, and I keep getting amazed every day when I use it to solve a business problem, that it keeps evolving so fast. So what we took 6 months or a year to build, now with this class of models, even with noisy data and whatnot, the state of the art is moving very, very fast. Now, it's also that GenAI is not there everywhere, but it is coming. For example, recommender systems was a traditional, different kind of models that were there. But LLM-based recommender system, LLM for rec, is an area that has caught up and has become state-of-the-art kind of models. Again, actually, one distinction that I want to call out very, very clearly is not every business just cares about support or chatbots, right? Chatbots is not the be all end all of the value that any company looks for. Pin code at PhonePe, being an e-commerce company, the core problem is not a chatbot. It is supply chain or the demand forecasting, pricing, all of that bit, right? From an e-commerce perspective, Pin code will have a different sort of perspective, but e-commerce perspective, demand forecasting, the supply chain optimization, the recommender systems, the search, all of those are core problems. Are all of them disrupted by GenAI? May or may not be. Demand forecasting, for example, has not yet been disrupted. Recommender systems, for sure, has come in. So if you flip the viewpoint from a business perspective in terms of what are the most important business problems to solve, is GenAI everywhere and everywhere? Not quite. Not yet. So the most valuable business problems, it will get there, is my sense. It's not yet there. So that's where it will evolve to, and it should evolve to, that the most important, impactful, valuable business problems is what you are able to solve from with GenAI tech. By GenAI tech, it's not really just the chatbot, but the tech means like areas like LLM for for recommender systems, etc. That class of models being applied to these business problems. And as they say, there is a step jump. This step jump is going to lift the accuracy, and it is going to become the state of the art, and it becomes that much more easier for everybody to adopt this technology. That's the hypothesis of vishwa.ai, a small plug. That's what we are hoping to do for small and medium businesses, to enable them to be able to leverage AI for their most impactful business problems.
So to bring a step change in whatever they're doing in terms of improving their processes.
So, and democratizing the use of and access of AI to a larger set of companies, which was not possible before.
So I just had one question. So while usually when we kind of talk about GenAI or whatnot, right, everybody kind of talks about chatbots, automated. So that's it. And you obviously do need a certain anchoring problem statement for people to be able to kind of get a wrap around how the tech works.
Okay.
I'm kind of more interested / curious to know, is there any other company or a proof of concept that you've seen which at least you're very surprised at the fact that GenAI tech was solving this particular problem statement in whatever way it was kind of solving for? Because chatbots and whatnot, everybody kind of understands. Like the true power comes after that. So it's very curious.
Sure. I'll maybe just, for lack of not intending to be a plug, but I'll take much at hand things that we've done and where we are seeing traction. So very simple problem of converting unstructured documents to structured documents, right? Just to concretize it further, restaurant menus,
right,
and digitizing a restaurant menu for anybody who just has an offline presence, trying to come to online or trying to use a restaurant POS provider. Very simple problem statements. Now, did the tech exist before this? Still fairly hard. Used to be there, OCR and etc. But with GenAI and what we've been able to sort of figure out and fine tune and whatnot, superb accuracy. That there are world's largest POS providers is sort of globally we are working with. They still continue to have very manual processes of sort of looking at these and converting them.
Okay.
Now that's where, so if I were to generalize what kind of capabilities, what we are calling this as unstructured data or a data extractor, data extraction agent, right? You give it any task, any unstructured document, any unstructured thing, be it invoices, forms, menus, etc., and you are able to convert it into a structured form, and there is a bunch of areas where it's applicable. So that is one concrete example where this is happening. Marketing, MarTech is another area where it's happening very, very fast.
Okay.
So any kind of campaign that you want to build, the time it takes from your ideation to converting it to graphics, to copy, to then publishing it, the entire human process of it, that is getting automated and more effective.
Even talking about the creation of the creative?
Or 3 steps.
Okay.
First is you think of a campaign idea.
Right.
In that ideation, you may sort of use GenAI to generate ideas.
Okay.
From that
Okay.
idea to creatives.
Understood.
That process as well to actually get the campaign out.
Sure.
And then from campaign to distribution of the campaign.
Sure.
You want to run it on Facebook, Instagram, to LinkedIn, to Twitter, etc., etc. There, doing that. So it's all about human productivity.
Yeah.
Like a marketer would do it manually everywhere. You have a big article, you squeeze it into 144 characters. All of those bits. With this tech, you will be able to do it very, very fast. So these are the two very concrete use cases that we are seeing
it's
very
very
good
interesting.
traction for. Where GenAI is not a chatbot.
Which is a lot of people are going to be surprised by that. Right?
Yeah, no, thanks for this. I think we've talked about very interesting problem statements of GenAI. People don't really think about. And I think also on this front, right, how do the job prospects of people in the analytics industry get affected? Right, the common question that comes to me is, does this make the role of a data analyst or a data scientist more redundant, right, or to some extent redundant? What does GenAI mean for data analysts or people specifically in the analytics industry? Maybe if Parth and Shiv, you can talk about this.
Go for sir.
Difficult to say, for sure.
It's
Like
still
you
as-
said, it's changing fast, but I think it's long way because for anything to work, the data needs to be clean. Right? All of these LLMs will work when your data is clean, your parsing is clean, your naming is clean.
Yes,
And
definitely.
What will not change for sure is that understanding of the domain and how did you get the data? How are you capturing it? Where are you capturing it? How will you tie it to the end? That I don't think will go with LLMs for sure. It's about utilization of these LLMs to improve your process. So, for example, coding and all of this, and like you said, using of algorithms, I think is getting commoditized very fast. Right? So anybody can pick and use.
With the advent of AI, the reasoning of these models is getting better and better. So, do you think domain understanding of these models will change in future?
Domain understanding of models, they can generalize to some extent, but a specific problem context might not be available. It can create probably more hypotheses which it has seen across, because at the end of the day it is trying to generalize information across multiple companies or multiple geographies and so on. Right? It's not customized to your organization and your state of the organization and your data, your infrastructure. It unless you create it to that extent, but right now it's not. So it is always going to give you a hypothesis which is generic. So you still need an individual to figure out what is relevant. It might help you identify possible hypothesis, but you still need an individual to figure out what is relevant for you and use that. So it is definitely aiding and making these movements faster on a day-by-day basis. Where will it land? Honestly, it's difficult for me at least. I'm not able to.
So that's also, I guess, there's one more question to it. I mean, some people view AI as a threat, poses threat. There are two schools of thought. One is of Geoffrey Hinton and some institutional big investors. Second is of Jan LeCun and Andrew Ng that say, okay, AI is a threat. It should be handled carefully. Second says that AI is not a threat. It should be democratized as much as possible. So everybody puts in some bits and bits and get this thing going. So what do you think? Is AI a threat?
And which school of thought do you belong to out of these two? Maybe?
See, threats can be in multiple forms. If you give the wrong powers, it can be dangerous, of course. But threat in terms of long-term impact of employment, I think there is some amount of threat in my opinion. Unless, like, probably every generation, every new invention will have an impact on the previous skill sets. So you need to adapt as a human being to be able to move forward. So in that sense, if today's data scientists believe that whatever they have learned is enough for future, I don't think it might be enough. So they need to adapt. So
my point of view, and I'll put it out loud if you are going to promise me you're not going to put that on the reel. So just to take a cue from what Sardi was saying, right? I genuinely do believe that with your AI models becoming much more powerful because it's getting that much more data to work on. The traditional expectations of what an analyst does today is going to be under question, and it is going to definitely have an impact, no doubt about it. And it's not said in the point of view of, oh, the world is ending, because what you are doing as analytics in 2010 versus what you're doing as analytics in 2024 is very, very different. But you just that you're right now, you've been in a place where it's kind of growing and it's more expanding. Earlier, reporting was a very separate thing. That was ERP. That was not analytics. Today, reporting is part of analytics. Now, having said that statement, which I believe is going to be the case, what matters then is not necessarily from a negative connotation, but more from a positive connotation. Let me get to what I mean by that. It requires an analytics professional to have a point of view on data, because everybody, when you say analytics, you're like SQL, I'll work on this, select star, join, yada yada yada. If it is statistical modeling, random forest, all of that thing, yes. But concepts of data engineering, which is how is it that whatever that you are working on, how was that generated? And there are a whole bunch of points of view and things that if you understand on the source aspect will help you become a better analyst. Now, all of those were not necessarily coming into play because it was more expanding. Now, if my CEO, imagine I'm part of a very small startup, and if my CEO can just be able to ask a few questions to a tool which gives me all the graphs, then they don't need Shiva to put all of this onto a PowerPoint, onto an email, send all of those things out. Now the question is, oh, you know what, this is what I'm going to end up doing, means you're painting yourself into a corner. So what it means to be able to look at concepts of data engineering and BI, that becomes a certain skill set that an analyst will have to end up getting. Now, I know for a fact that your Tableau's, ClickSenses of the world have already incorporated this, which is the equivalent of speech to SQL, where you can ask a question which says, hey, how much was my sales growing region on region? And it gives you a pretty darn accurate answer.
So Power BI has a Q&A feature for that.
All of those guys have those features out there. But what probably that tool might not end up doing is, in PhonePe today, per day, we clock about 250 million transactions in one day, which means over a month, that's a lot of transactions. That row goes into the billions. The ability to optimize how my data model will be is something which maybe a generative AI model might not be able to do it today. And please correct me if my thing is wrong, because that's my viewpoint. I could be totally off. So if that assumption is correct, then that is where your skill sets needs to go into, saying that I'm gonna shift myself a little outside of the business problem statement and get myself more valuable by focusing on this. And it's the same thing. Now I pride myself, when I say any analyst might pride myself saying that, oh, I wrote all of these complex SQL queries to be able to get all of this data out. Be smart where you use that technology to do this grunt work, and you either spend more time in the market or you upskill yourself on aspects of product or marketing and then start applying it. So the minute you look at it as this faceless, nameless thing is going to get my job, you're going to start going down a spiral path. And yes, that threat is real. But where it kind of comes down to is acknowledging the fact that that's going to change my life. It's the same thing, right? Like steam engine and whatnot, we were like, oh, what is this thing? What if it blows up in my face? But when used the right way is what is going to power your entire trajectory out. So acknowledging the fact that this tool is going to make my life easier. Yes, it is possibly going to reduce the fact that earlier if I needed 100 people, I might be able to do the same thing in 50. Might be the case, sure. But being a little bit more prepared where I say that, but I'll make sure that through these three virtues of whether it is going to be BI, whether it is, I'll probably understand the math a little bit more, or I'll get a fairly stronger understanding of business context, is how you might end up being in that 50. Or if you're not, then whatever is the next company, you will be able to kind of get into that in that sense.
Yeah, please continue.
So, I mean, my closing argument is just merely the fact, saying that It's not going to probably change my life. It might be a little early, 100%, but I genuinely think that that's where it is heading to. And it's that Sun Tzu art of war type of thing. If you know what is coming your way, you got to be a little bit more prepared for it. And that preparation isn't one where you quit your job and you sit for 1 year and prepare for it. That's not it. Taking those smaller things to understand how a chat GPT or whatnot works today and just making yourself that much more productive is going to fit into your longer run. And that balancing is where I would suggest folks to kind of get into.
That's going to help.
Super helpful. I think this is very, very useful. I think the role will evolve, productivity will improve because the bandwidth will be freed up for whatever things really matter, maybe going out in the market, right? And wherever they're, let's say, simply coding or simple even SQL queries, right? All that grunt work or even DAX queries in Power BI, for example, there's a Copilot integration that has happened there. You don't need to write the DAX query yourself in Power BI. And even you have a lot of this stuff in specifically the Microsoft suite, right? Entire. So I think that really, productivity will really improve. Super helpful. Yeah.
So one other aspect is, as productivity tool, it has arrived almost, right?
Yeah.
As an auto suggest or as you were saying, auto complete, it's there. To your question of whether it's a threat and that school, time will tell. What my personal point of view, very interesting, is this concept of emergent properties that these models have been showing. As a society, we haven't handled that well. The impact of social media, the impact of TikTok, the impact of Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Reels on kids. As a generation, we don't know. As a father, I know they spend so much time. I don't know. They have such sharp things that they know of because it was shown in a TikTok reel. But certain constructs they may not know at all. So it's a very, very sort of evolving world that we don't understand. It doesn't fit that something that we've grown up with or something that we've seen. So time will tell. Only time can tell. What has changed as a pattern is data entry, calculators in 70s, 80s, the typists were the sexiest jobs in 60s, 70s. That was the highest skill job. As we are saying, it will evolve. So analyst, as we knew, the classic analyst was just for reporting the numbers that were needed, and if you had 20, only one might suffice, etc. So as a productivity tool, it has arrived. As emergent properties, the scary thing to me that looks like is if you combine General Dynamics with OpenAI, General Dynamics with all the actuators and the motors and the robotic dog with a gun, with these models, that is dangerous. That should not happen. As long as that doesn't happen, then I think this is sort of a suite of productivity tools that is coming in, that is making us as human race more efficient. So we will do something else. We were hunter-gatherers before. We will have to figure out. Like the dot-com burst opened up so many jobs, Java, this, that.
Right.
But that is, I think, as a meta thing, if you look at how India tech system has evolved, 2 decades ago, nobody knew about Java, C++. All of a sudden with Y2K, in the last 20-25 years, this industry became the hottest, sexiest industry. 10 years down the line, that may no longer be the case, right? It'll be a very, very different landscape. The BPOs would be way efficient. So instead of employing 100 people per client, they might employ 5, 10, 15 people per. So the landscape is going to change. Now, what that looks like, how will we reskill, where will we go, and what are the kind of things that we'll do, we'll have to figure out.
Wow, yeah. No, I think this expands the scope of our discussion also. There's a lot of learnings from whatever you've said, right? Kinds of applications and kind of impact it can have 10 years down the line. All right, so I think before we move to the last section, which is rapid fire, and we have a specific rapid fire for each of you. But before that, I just want to, I think, quickly talk about any advice you would have. One, for people entering the space, and second, for people who are in the space but want to succeed in the role, right? In data science specifically, data science, data analytics. And very quickly, I think it's very brief discussion if we can have on this.
I think the first thing, which is anybody who wants to come in, I think we covered that like a fair bit in that sense, right? For somebody who's already there, I think we kind of covered this in some bits and shape as well, but I think it's very important for somebody to understand and acknowledge the fact that they gotta be having what we call a T shape of learning, right? So T shape is essentially you gotta have a breadth in a lot of things and probably depth in something. That something could be whatever floats your boat. But people do gotta understand that right now, if you want to kind of grow as an analytics leader, no longer, hey, I am a business analytics leader. You ask me anything on domain context and whatnot is good enough. Can I become, let's say, the chief analytics officer? Let's go to CXOs, right? So can I become the chief analytics officer? No, because at that particular level, or as in when you kind of start growing in, you're expected to have a point of view on data engineering. You're expected to have a point of view on the more tech-related aspect, where you need to know what it means to be able to deploy a machine learning model, even if you've not necessarily done it. Or you put it in a way smart enough to be able to kind of find the right people and then ask the right questions to get to that. So that breadth, I believe, is going to be very, very important. And I'm not saying that, hey, here is somebody who's 3 years of experience who wants to become a chief analytics officer today. That's not the point. But that openness to be able to say, I need to kind of always pick and understand different aspects along that path is the only thing that I would kind of definitely suggest. That breadth today might be a little bit more constrained, not necessarily because they don't want to, but because you're probably even like, especially right now when market conditions do mean that you're going to be stretching and you're going to be like hunkered down in your line of work and you're kind of going on tunnel vision. It's always important to also acknowledge that I need to take a little bit of time so that I become that much more flexible and valuable across the value chain.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you're super helpful.
Into that, similarly, I would just add on saying you need to own the problem end to end and try to cover all parts of it instead of focusing on your. Like I said, I mean, there will come a point in anybody's life when you are trying to grow beyond a point. You need to know other things. You cannot be specific to your domain or your specialization. You have to learn. So practically any CEO doesn't know everything about every specialization, right? It's just humanly not possible. But you need to know enough to be able to ask the right questions to be able to make sense out of it and then make a decision. So in that sense, always need, for example, if you are using a computer, it doesn't mean that you know exactly how the hardware works, right? You still need to know what you need to know to solve your job. So in that sense, you need to become a little bit of generalist and not just a specialist in all scenarios.
Broaden your domain to jump to next level. That's interesting.
So the only thing that I'll add, essentially in my life career as well, that's how it has happened. I was a researcher, pure data scientist at Flipkart, then at Udaan, from data science to analytics, product analytics, to data platform, which is data engineering, fraud and abuse, which was a core P&L kind of a role. So that expansion, and then similarly now with all hats as such. I think the key thing for me is sort of just keep learning, having that learning curve in whatever dimension that you like, that you enjoy. For example, at Udaan, the dimension that I enjoyed the most was the data platform, data engineering aspect. Data science, obviously, I had come from that background, so that was quote unquote my background, my strength as such. But data engineering is something that I had not done. So I enjoyed doing that, hands-on, learning stuff. Analytics is something that I had not done, that I enjoyed doing. So to me, it's a very simple funda. Keep learning. Whatever you like to learn, that keeps you happy, that keeps you engaged, and hopefully takes you to the next level. And maybe that's sort of a much longer time frame advice, so to say. In the shorter time frame advice, which seems like the theme of your thing, कि अभी के अभी college hires को कुछ कराना है. So, as you said, I did not know this term, the T-shaped learning curve, but that's a very, very strong concept. Like even for a hiring, you need to have 1 or 2 dimensions of depth very strongly. For example, in data scientist role, applied ML, the concepts of ML, those are the core non-negotiables that you need to have a very clear depth on. And then along with that, the product understanding or the domain, as we call it, needs to be there. It cannot be zero. How is that demonstrated? You're working on a project, but you don't know why you are working on it. What's the end goal of it? Or in a research project, you don't quite know what is the context of why you are doing this research. My professor said so is not a good answer. Right? He gave me that problem statement. It's not a good answer. So understanding the problem context, why is this problem relevant? What is the applicability of it? Even though you may have cooked it up, that's okay. But at least understanding the story behind why is this problem even relevant is a very important aspect that needs to be there, which translate to in professional world of the product or the domain understanding. And then again, the tools of the trade, like engineering aspect. Data science, this typically coming out of college, engineering, coding needs to be very, very strong as well. So those are the dimensions that need to be there, and obviously you need to have a depth here.
I just add one more point to it, right? As you were saying, I just realized that all of those core skill sets, everything, yes. But we kind of mentioned that at the end of the day, we're not isolated islands working on all of these things. You're at the end of the day working with people. And if you're sitting on data, the one thing which is it's usually not taken into account or not taken into consideration is the ability for you to tell a story from data. Because at the end of the day, numbers are just that. Numbers are numbers. Nobody is going to remember anything in terms of your numbers. Like plug over here, there are a couple of wonderful people who do some of these storytelling conversations in terms of how is it that you present a business story, right? How is it that you weave together in a way where you're able to kind of make the other people understand. And this wonderful thing kind of comes up. If you had to ask anybody in the room, let's say I'm addressing 80 folks from analytics, from PhonePe, all working on the same area. If I were to ask, hey, what is the transaction of yesterday? Probably almost all of them might be able to kind of give me the number. If I were to say, do you know what was the growth rate from January to May? Maybe half of them might be able to kind of give it. If you say, what was the growth rate from year on year? Maybe 25% of them might be able to kind of give it. But if I collectively ask, hey, what is the moral of the tortoise and the hare? I am willing to bet my next month's paycheck that everybody will give me the exact same answer. Slow and steady wins the race. So that's where it kind of comes in. People, while the numbers are important for you to land the concept, people don't remember numbers. People remember what the story behind the numbers. The fact that son and father, situation sticks in my head. I still don't know how much transactions that particular merchant would have done. I just know it's large enough. But it's this story that sticks. And especially if you're an analyst, it is your responsibility to put the insight out to your stakeholders or to your team with them with the least effort from the other side to be able to understand what is it that you're saying. And crafting that story will take time, but that requires some conscious effort. And that usually is a skill set that helps a lot because you're able to quickly influence the result of your analysis in a more easier way. We all know that data can be said, shown in whatever way possible. But if assuming that you're coming in with the right integrity, where you're not necessarily modifying the metric to make it look good or bad. Let's say that your analysis truly is representative of what is going on. There might still be some people who might not necessarily want to hear it. But when put in that right story, you'll be able to kind of at least get a more collective outcome from the larger group. So.
Yeah, no, I think really tells the importance of data storytelling. It's an art more than a science.
Actually, no. Not just the data. Anywhere. Like even if you look at the best presentations in deeply researched conferences, they don't start with the math of the paper. The best presentations are the one that are intuitively able to explain the story. In the most technical of the conferences and the most technical of the presentations, it's the storytelling. Why Andrew Ng is such a great person in the field is because of his storytelling. He explains things so easily, so intuitively that you're able to relate to it and understand. And that's what sort of gets you. So the importance of storytelling, I would extend this point not just from data, but and every aspect actually. Just one quick anecdote. During our PhD, we were trained to there would be trainings on how to build a presentation, how to present. And my advisor would tell me, you need to have a takeaway on every slide. Why is it that you are showing? The audience is doing you a favor. To just extend his point, they are doing you a favor. Why should they sit through your, just understand the most boring thing that they can do in a day? What's in it for them, right? So every slide should have that, and that's the storytelling part of it. That what is the key takeaway that needs to be there in every aspect. Analytics and data story for sure.
Definitely, I think super helpful.
There's so many things to ask. I don't think we can cover in one podcast. I mean, the socio-political effect of generative AI. There was some interesting experiments in Stanford, that small whale experiments, where they left 25 chat GPTs and let them interact with each other, how they evolved. But yeah, I guess we'll have episode 2 also.
Right, and I think now it's time to move to the rapid fire round. I want to start with Shiva maybe.
Oh, yikes. Okay.
And what's one thing that comes to your mind? Maybe I'll just speak a word. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? We don't need the explanation why that comes to your mind.
Sure.
When you think of it that
Coffee
way.
with current types.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So you just need a word.
no, I don't need a word. Maybe maybe first thing can be a phrase, a short
Sure.
phrase. Yeah, all right. Okay. Dashboard.
User interface, but important.
Analytics tool.
A tool.
Favorite,
That's my answer.
favorite analytics tool.
It's actually a tool called Echo, which is a PhonePe internal tool.
Okay, understood.
Long story short, it's at our scale of data, it's one which allows us to do real-time analysis, combing through billions of app events, but something almost in near real time, and the entire company just loves it. So there.
So, sorry, I'm cutting this, but did you take this outside? Like, are you
No.
planning to? Understood. SQL or Python?
Heart says SQL.
Business intelligence.
It's data plus scale.
Data at scale.
P-value.
Depends on the interpretation of the presenter.
See?
That's nice.
Yeah, I don't want to grill you much. Yeah, I think I want to move to Parth now.
Okay.
You've worked in fintech, so compliance.
In startups, not the most important.
Credit score.
Fundamental for automation.
Risk modeling.
Extremely important.
Risk appetite changes. Will you update an existing model or create a new one? Risk appetite of the company changes.
Try to use what you have first.
Non-performing assets.
Something nobody likes.
ChatGPT or Gemini?
ChatGPT.
And so,
Or if anything else, maybe any other.
Mistral is also doing good for us.
Understood. Now I want to move to Mohit. Generative AI.
Generative AI.
that's the answer.
Okay. Misconception about AI.
It's means to an end, not the end itself.
Very deep.
Solves all problems. That's the best.
Yeah, no, but it's a means to an end. People think it's the end itself, but yeah, that's it.
Roadmap to AI.
Get your data story right.
Roadmap to learning in the AI space.
Get your basics right.
emerging technology in AI?
Everything.
Everything.
US or India?
India.
Why? Obviously, we know the answer through the podcast. But then the natural question is why?
But in what context? In every context, it is
Gen AI
India
is talking about, I
anyways.
guess. In general, I just want to keep this to the university. All right. Before the end, this I think last thing. What are you reading? I want everyone to answer this. any newsletter you're following? Any reading material? Anything? Maybe even a book.
I'll go first. So I read as much as I can. I'm actually reading 3 books simultaneously. One is a book called The Perfectionist Trap. I'm a self-proclaimed perfectionist who wants to move away from that really, really bad habit. So that was one. The second one is a book on mindfulness. And the third one is a book called Deep Work by this person called Cal Newport. And these are the 3 that I'm reading right now. In addition to that, I am rereading Calvin and Hobbes for my 6-year-old daughter. So these are the 4.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So taking a cue from him, then that made it easier. I don't read books a lot, but I'm reading stories for my daughter.
Any newsletter or any blog you follow?
Bunch of them. So Andrew NG related newsletters from, and in general, not necessarily about MLAI. FinShots is something which I definitely find extremely crisp. One of the few companies I think I admire in the current generation. So
Every morning 9 a.m. they do an article.
yeah.
Consistently.
Consistently, that's important.
Interesting. So I don't have a reading list or a very structured reading list. I think there are enough WhatsApp groups that keep throwing up the latest, greatest, interesting articles that I read, and that I do spend time reading them, but through WhatsApp. So in that sense, it's unstructured, or you can say structured. के WhatsApp में जो चल रहा है in certain select groups. That's one. The second is the last book that I read was To Sell Is Human. That's the one dimension that I was trying to figure out.
So data scientists also reading about selling is very, very unique.
Which is why I was referred this book by like even before I thought about the startup or doing that, but by a old friend who happens to be a founder as well. He's like, just read this book, because the point of that book is it's not about selling in your professional life. As he said, when we say storytelling, you are selling your story.
Yeah.
His articulation was, you need the room convinced about what you are telling from the data. That is selling, and that's the point of view with that book. So To Sell Is Human is, even if you're trying to make your kids do something, you are selling that idea. So that kind of a construct. So it was sort of a very different perspective of looking at things.
Noting it down to order immediately.
Yeah, To Sell Is Human.
Super. I think I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure the audience will too. Thanks a lot for sparing time. I really admire you guys, of course, but then also the discussion that we've had has been, maybe, we didn't expect this kind of a discussion to happen, and I hope you enjoyed as well. Thank you. Thanks
Good
a
fun,
lot.
man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
for having
much
us.
for being such a great host.
Thank you.
Fully recording is done.
Record button दबाया था ना.